Chapter 95. As for Lu Rui's speed of learning Tai Chi, Li Yi already didn't know what words to use to describe it. It was because he had a heaven-defying cheating device that he was able to master it in a very short period of time. However, Lu Rui only needed to be taught twice and corrected a few movements before she was able to execute a near-standard Taiji fist. Although there were still some flaws, she was beautiful and tall. More importantly, she had a strong martial arts foundation. The movements she executed were much better than Li Yi's. This made Li Yi, who was standing at the side, sigh in his heart. These movements were indeed different when done by a woman. Whether it was practical or not, at least it looked extremely pleasing to the eye. Not long after, there was a knock on the door which made Li Yi unable to enjoy it so peacefully. It didn't sound like Fong. The way he knocked on the door was much rougher than this. It also wasn't Lu Rui. When second Miss came back, she never had to go through the trouble of knocking on the door. She could just fly in from outside. Li Yi walked over and opened the door. He saw two middle-aged men standing behind the door, their faces full of smiles. Seeing the two men, Li Yi was stunned for a moment. They looked familiar. He thought that he had seen them before. After thinking carefully, he remembered that it was last night. The two of them sent some eggs and mooncakes, and then he sent Xiao Huan away. As for their identity, it seemed that they were one of Lu's sister Rui's uncles. They belonged to the direct line of descent. Ever since the Lu clan settled down here, the two girls had quite a few uncles after a few generations of inheritance. It had to be said that the Lu family's ability to produce sons was not just for show. It was said that Lu Rui's grandfather had 5 brothers, and the 5 of them each had their own children, giving birth to a bunch of sons. They were Lu Rui and her sister's uncles. On the other hand, the direct line of descent was only passed down from Lu Rui's father's line. There were only 2 girls in the next generation. 4th uncle, 7th uncle, what's the matter? Although Lu Rui had never gotten along with these people as juniors, she still had the necessary etiquette. Lu Rui walked over and bowed to the 2 of them. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside. Seeing that Li Yi and Lu Rui didn't seem to want to invite them in, the 2 of them laughed dryly. May I know why 4th uncle and 7th uncle have come this time? After a while, Lu Rui looked at the 2 of them and asked again. Most of these uncles weren't on good terms with her and her sister. Yesterday, the 2 of them had eagerly sent gifts over, which had already made her extremely surprised. Now that he had come to visit again, it seemed that he really did have something important to do. The 2 of them looked hesitant, but their eyes flashed with determination. They took out a few pieces of yellowed paper and placed them on the table in front of them. 4th uncle, what do you mean? Lu Rui looked at the things on the table and turned to look at him. Finally, a trace of doubt appeared in her beautiful eyes. When her father was still alive, the village was one, but when he had an accident, those uncles immediately wanted to separate from the family. The 2 sisters were still young at that time, and almost all the things that belonged to them were taken away. At that time, the other party didn't give them any face at all. Why did their temperament change now? The middle-aged man on the left said, Rui, what happened in the past was our fault. When we separated from the family, these land deeds should have belonged to you and Rui. You should accept them. 4th uncle, what do you want to say? Just say it. Of course, Lu Rui wouldn't think that they suddenly found their conscience and wanted to return the things that they had taken away. There must be a bigger plot for them to act like this. The middle-aged man hesitated for a while and said again, since Rui said so, I'll say it directly. You know, these 2 years have not been good and life at home has been really hard. In a few days, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to even eat. Look, the sugar-coated haws made by the son-in-law are so popular. Can we? At this point, the middle-aged man's meaning was already very clear. Although the sugar-coated haws business was good, people only recognized the loose sugar-coated haws sold by Fong and the others. The business of other vendors was still bleak and pitiful. If they also wanted to make a fortune by selling sugar-coated haws, even if they got the secret recipe without their consent, they couldn't use the name of the Lus and the profit would still be pitiful. If they could get their consent and start the sugar-coated haws business, then this land wouldn't be much at all. The land in the stockade wasn't considered good farmland to begin with. When the year was good, the production could more or less meet the needs of life. If it was a disaster year like last year, there was almost no harvest for the whole year, then what was the use of the land? If they had known that Rui would be able to snatch such a son-in-law in a few years, there would have been no separation of the family that year. They would have desperately fawned on the two sisters if they could. Husband, you decide on this matter. Lu Rui didn't answer them. She turned her head and said to Li Yi. Regarding the sugar-coated haws, he had been the one doing it from beginning to end. Lu Rui had never asked, so naturally she wouldn't make the decision for him at this time. In fact, Li Yi had already roughly understood the intentions of Lu Rui's uncles last night. The status of the Lu's sugar-coated haws in Qing and prefectural city was roughly equivalent to the old Beijing sugar-coated haws of later generations. It was a time-honored brand with guaranteed quality. They were only after this name. He turned to look at the two and smiled. Fourth uncle. Seventh uncle, right? The two knew in their hearts that whether or not they could succeed today depended on the scholar in front of them. They hurriedly responded, and the smile on their faces became even more amiable. Li Yi's expression was hesitant. He revealed a thoughtful expression and said, "It's not impossible for you to use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws. But what?" The two immediately asked. "But you can only do it in the form of an alliance," Li Yi said, looking at them. "What do you mean by an alliance?" The two looked at each other and asked Li Yi in confusion. Even Lu Rui's beautiful eyes showed a trace of doubt. It was clearly the first time she had heard of such a term. The meaning of an alliance is very simple. We can agree to let you use the Lu's name to sell sugar-coated haws, but we will take half of the daily profits, Li Yi said, looking at them. The Lu's sugar-coated haws name was not so easy to spread. It was not very realistic to ask them to fork out a large sum of money in advance. Explaining the concept of an alliance to them in the future was also like playing the lute to a cow. They could only use this simple and crude method. 50%. The two of them exclaimed at the same time. This number for them was a little too much to bear. No one would be willing to give half of the hard-earned money to someone else. Son-in-law, isn't 50% a little too much? Fourth uncle of the Lu's looked at Li Yi and asked with some difficulty. Li Yi smiled without saying anything, indicating that there was no room for discussion on this matter. After bullying my wife and sister-in-law for so many years, it was time to pay back some interest. Let us think about this matter. Li Yi smiled as he watched the two of them walk out the door, waiting patiently. After a moment, the two of them walked back in. Fourth uncle thought for a moment, then said, 50% is really a little too much. We'll go back and think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. He was obviously extremely unwilling to give half of the profits to others. After the discussion between the two of them just now, when they went back, they would join forces with the other direct family members to put pressure on them. It would be best if they could waive the alliance fee, but if that was not possible, it was not impossible to reduce it to half. After saying that, he turned around and walked out the door. Rui, son-in-law, without your agreement, I won't be able to earn even 50%. 50%, then 50%. I agree. Fourth uncle of the Lu's had one foot out the door when he heard the familiar voice of seventh uncle behind him. Bang! Fourth uncle of the Lu's tripped on the doorsill, and his body flew forward half a foot before landing heavily on the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Fourth uncle, why are you so polite? Not too far away from him, old Fong was standing there, looking at the scene before him with a look of astonishment on his face. Chapter 96. Fourth Uncle Lu left quickly and returned quickly as well. The fall on the doorstep seemed to have made him think things through. He climbed up and patted the dust off his body as if nothing had happened. He readily agreed. He had already thought it through. He was also willing to pay the 50% of the joining fee. Of course, how the other person secretly cursed seventh uncle for being a treacherous pig-like teammate was not something that Li Yi cared about. The candied haws business wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. Fong and the others had more important things to do, so they naturally couldn't spend all their time on this. They urgently lacked manpower. This was the first problem they had to face if they wanted to expand the candied haws business. The demand for the Lu family's candied haws in Qing and prefectural city was far from being saturated. There was still a lot of profit to be made. Of course, Li Yi couldn't just give this portion of the profit to the Lu family's direct descendants. It wasn't impossible for them to interfere, but if he didn't peel off a few layers of skin from them, how could he be worthy of the care these people had given the Lu sisters all these years? Son-in-law, do you really plan on letting them do the candied haws business? Fong walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a face full of confusion. For Fong, this was currently the only profitable business. Naturally, he wasn't willing to let the direct descendants take advantage of it for nothing. He had personally witnessed how these people treated the two ladies these past few years. Fong didn't even want to give them 10% of the profit, let alone 50%. You have to look at the long term. Just think of it as them making money for us. Li Yi could only think of another way to explain things to Fong, who only knew how to look at things in front of him. Although it wasn't easy for Fong's brain to work around things, his intelligence was still within the range of a normal person. After hearing Li Yi's explanation, he somewhat understood. Just letting them borrow the Liu family's Candied Ha's name and they could get 50% of the profit for nothing. Thinking about it this way, it didn't seem like a loss. Thinking of this, Fong's face showed his signature silly smile. Looking at the silly smile on Fong's face, Li Yi couldn't help but think of the scene last night when this guy tricked him. He resisted the urge to take off his shoes and slap his face. He smiled and said, "Don't smile like an idiot. Come in, I have something to tell you." For some reason, Fong's heart trembled when he saw the smile on Li Yi's face. He suddenly had a bad premonition. After an hour, Fong walked out of the courtyard with a worried look on his face. He looked back at the house and let out a long sigh. The son-in-law actually handed the task of building a workshop to him and wanted it to be completed within 5 days. If he did it well, there would be no reward. If he didn't do it well, his bonus of half a month of Candied Ha's would be deducted. Fong was extremely suspicious in his heart. This was definitely the son-in-law's revenge for what he did last night. He didn't want to take this hot potato, but he thought that if he didn't let the son-in-law vent his anger, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to sleep well every night. Sooner or later there would be a knife. This time it was better to take it happily. If he had known that retribution would come so quickly last night. Alas, he regretted it so much. He sighed all the way back and saw a figure pacing back and forth in front of the door from a distance. It was a thin man pacing back and forth while rubbing his hands. From time to time he glanced into the courtyard, but he didn't take a step in. "Yang Xiaojun, what are you doing here?" Fong walked over with large strides and looked at the man. His face turned cold as he asked coldly, "Fong, I..." The man suddenly heard a voice behind him and turned to look at Fong. A trace of shame appeared on his face. After a long time he opened his mouth and said with some difficulty, I came to borrow some food from you. There hasn't been any food at home for 2 days. It doesn't matter if I don't have enough to eat, but the child..." Fong's face was rarely gloomy. There was an irrepressible anger in his eyes as he looked at the man. When Rui's father was still alive, this man was like himself and the others. He was also by the side of the direct line of descent. They grew up together and were considered the closest brothers. However, ever since the old stockade master left, only Fong and a few others stayed. The man and most of the others chose to get close to the direct line of descent. From then on, Fong and him did not have any contact. Even when they met in the stockade and the man wanted to greet him, Fong would just coldly walk past him. Being betrayed by his best brother was a knot that had been stuck in Fong's heart for all these years. "I've let you two ladies down for what happened back then. I've let you down. You can beat me up, but I'm begging you to lend me some food. Otherwise, the child will really starve to death." The shame on the man's face deepened. He was a famous man. Even if he had to starve to death, he wouldn't have been able to lower himself to look for Fong. However, there was still a child at home who hadn't eaten for 2 days. Fong's expression was still cold. Even though he knew that the man had been driven into a corner and had no choice but to leave in order to feed his family, there was always a thorn in his heart. Even now he could not forgive him. Seeing that Fong did not speak for a long time, a hint of defeat finally appeared on the man's face. A look of despair appeared in his eyes as he turned around and walked away without saying a word. He would rather starve to death than beg for help. This was indeed his limit. After taking 2 steps, an angry shout came from behind him. "Yang Xiaojun, you mother***, stop right there." Turning his head, a huge fist came flying at him and smashed fiercely into his face. At the same time Fong's furious voice came, "You be ****, I've wanted to beat you up for a long time." After being punched in the face, the man immediately felt dizzy and saw stars. He was also angered and returned a punch as he cursed, "Come on, I'm not afraid of you. Old Fong hadn't expected his opponent to fight back and was caught off guard. The fist landed on his face, causing his eyes to swell like a panda's. Cursing angrily, he punched back and began to wrestle with the man. The two of them punched and kicked each other. After all, the man's physique was much inferior to Fong's. Although he was not suppressed and beaten, he was still the one at a disadvantage. After being kicked to the ground by Fong for an unknown number of times, he lay there panting and was unwilling to get up again. The last time I beat you up so happily was probably more than 10 years ago, right? Old Fong wiped the sweat off his forehead. Although his face was covered in bruises, there was a comfortable expression on his face. Yes, it's been more than 10 years. The man looked up at the sky as a trace of reminiscence appeared on his face. The reminiscence flashed on Fong's face, and then he kicked the man and said coldly, "If you're not dead, come in with me." After a while, Fong stuffed a large bag of refined rice into the man's hand and scolded, "This food is for my nephew. It has nothing to do with you, Yang Xiaojun." Fong. The bag of rice seemed to be at least a dozen kilograms. A trace of emotion appeared on the man's face. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by Fong with a wave of his hand. "These days the son-in-law is going to build a workshop. If you have nothing to do, come and work with me. You'll get 10 copper coins a day and you'll eat your fill. Don't say that I, Fong, treat you badly." Fong punched him in the chest and said, "And those bastards, if they're willing to come and work with me, let them come." "Thank you." The man was stunned when he heard the words, and then his face showed ecstasy. He only said half a sentence and Fong waved his hand and said, "Okay, go home quickly. Don't let your mother-in-law wait. If you're willing to work, come and find me after dinner." "Son-in-law, I found everyone." Li Yi was planning how the floral water workshop should be built in the room. Fong pushed the door and said at the top of his voice, "So fast, hiss you are." Li Yi raised his head and looked at Fong's bruised and swollen face. He took a breath and couldn't help but ask, "Did you really go to a brothel last night and was discovered by your mother-in-law today?" Chapter 97. Li Yi did not doubt whether Fong had visited the brothel last night. It was not because he believed in his character but because he did not have that much money. Although the candied Ha's business brought in money every day with Fong's current savings, it was not enough for him to visit a brothel. That kind of brothel was a place where the rich went. Fong's wife was in charge of the money, and it was good enough that she could give him a few dozen copper coins as pocket money. If he went to that kind of place, he might not even be able to afford the cheapest girl. However, although Fong looked a little embarrassed, he seemed to be in a good mood, so Li Yi did not continue to ask. If this was the daily hobby of the couple in the bedroom, it would be a little awkward for an outsider to ask. The construction of the workshop was left to Fong and the others. These men were all experts in many aspects. They were good at farming, herding horses, building walls, and fighting. Except for some things that needed to be told in advance, Li Yi did not need to worry about it. As for the location of the workshop, after a round of inspection by Li Yi and Fong, they had more or less decided on it. Considering safety and confidentiality, of course, the workshop could not be built in the stockade village. Using the distillation method to purify alcohol required open fire, and alcohol was flammable. If something happened and the stockade village was set on fire, it would be very lively. Of course, confidentiality was also a big part of the reason. Whether it was the production of ruidu or the distillation of alcohol, there was not much technical difficulty. If the confidentiality was not done well and someone learned it secretly and spread it, then naturally these two things could not be used to make money. Considering the transportation, water source, and many other factors, the location of the workshop was finally chosen to be outside the stockade village, next to a stream near the back mountain. The stream was not big and there had never been a mountain flood for decades. It was convenient to get water and it was very safe. He gave the finished drawing to Fong. He only needed to go and look at it every day and he did not need to worry about other things. As a man who majored in engineering, although he did not specialize in civil engineering or architecture, things like drawing couldn't be more simple for Li Yi. The blueprint of the workshop was based on the workshop of the future. Only some minor changes were made according to the actual situation. There were only a few drawings, some flat, some three-dimensional, and some simple lines, but they clearly expressed the structure of the workshop. It was clear at a glance. Fong and the others only needed to build according to the drawings. Of course, before that he had to first rent a shop in the prefecture city. Originally he had only planned to rent a normal shop, but after winning against Xianxia yesterday he had gained 300 taels of liquid capital, so he had to change his plans. 300 taels of silver was enough to rent a shop with a good location in a bustling area. Originally he planned to go down the mountain to rent a shop and renovate it over the next few days. Then he would take out some Rui nectar to test the market. After the workshop was built he would be able to mass produce it. However, changes often came a little faster than planned. Many people in the village were eyeing the candied Ha's business. In the past it was not easy for the direct descendants of the Lu family to ask for it. Of course, they also knew that even if they asked for it, Feng Laosan and the others would not agree. However, the success of Feng Laosan and Feng Laosan made them widen their eyes. Just by handing over 2 land deeds, they could sell candied Ha's in the name of the Lu family. Although the joining fee of 50% made their hearts ache when they thought about it, as long as they could succeed in the candied Ha's business, even if they had to hand over 50% of the profits, they could still live a much better life than what they had now. No matter how they looked at it, it was a good deal. Land was the foundation of a family. Under normal circumstances, they would not easily hand over the land. However, how much food could the land produce in a year? Usually it was fine and the family could always eat their fill. If the harvest was bad one year, the whole family would have to tighten their waistbands to live. Looking at Feng Laosan and the others, they had only been with Rui's son-in-law for a short time. What kind of life were they living now? How could the direct descendants feel at ease? As a result, in the past 2 days, Li Yi's house was almost trampled to the ground by these people. Land deeds joining fee. They had already gotten the information they wanted from Feng Laosan and Feng Laosan. These people were very straightforward. They slapped the land deeds on the table one by one. Before Li Yi mentioned the joining fee, they took the initiative to make an agreement. 50% was 50%. Everyone would get 50% and no one would lose out. From the beginning to the end, these uncles' attitudes were very humble. The smiles on their faces were as kind as they could be. After all, no one wanted to go against money. What kind of life they would lead in the future was completely up to Li Yi's decision. Lu Rui did not ask about what Li Yi had done. She only silently put away the land deeds that Li Yi had handed over to her. However, Xiaohuan's pretty face was full of smiles these days. After being bullied for a long time by those people, she was very happy to see them talking to the son-in-law with a smile. To be honest, Li Yi was not interested in the land. In this era, as long as one wanted money, it was a very simple thing to buy land. Moreover, the land here was not like the land in the future where the right to use it was only for a few decades. Even if the dynasty changed and the dynasty changed, it would only recognize the deed and not the owner. If it was your land, it would be your land. In order to maintain stability, the ruler would not take back the land. As long as you had the land deed, you were still the owner of the land and no one could take it away. The barren land of Willow Leaves village was really not attractive to Li Yi. He just wanted to take back what should belong to them. The real reason why he asked the direct descendants of Lu's to intervene in the business of candied Ha's was that Feng and the others should always leave some soup for others to drink. Under his wise leadership, Feng and the others would only get better and better in the future. Even if Feng wanted to live in a big house and marry a concubine, it was not impossible. There was no harm if there was no comparison. A few people were living a well-off life, but most people in the village were still hovering above the line of food and clothing. The gap between the rich and the poor was so big. If it went on like this, there would be trouble sooner or later. But now, such a hidden danger had been extinguished by Li Yi before it even had a chance to show itself. Of course, it only solved the problem of the direct descendants of Lu's. After all, most of the people in the village were the former bandits like Feng and the others. Their lives were even more difficult. However, for these people, being able to fill the stomachs of their families was already the greatest satisfaction they could get. This request was not too high. Even if Li Yi did not mention it, old Feng and the others would also think of helping out on a daily basis, so there would not be any major problems. Chapter 98. Brother, may I know where the nearest broker house is? On the busy street of Qing'an Prefecture, the handsome scholar stopped a passing man. He cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile. The man cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile, "Go straight ahead for about half a mile, cross a street and then turn left. After crossing 2 streets you will see a marketplace. Is the broker house in the marketplace? The handsome scholar looked at him and asked. No. There are many people in the marketplace. Brother, you can ask someone there. Someone should know where the broker house is. The man smiled and turned away with a calm face. Haha. Looking at the back of the man leaving, Li Yi forced a smile on his face and felt like thousands of horses were galloping in his heart. He was not in a hurry to ask the broker. He was a little tired after walking all the way down the mountain. He rested for a while at a tea stall on the side of the street, wondering if he should buy a carriage. The distance between Willow Leaf Village and Qing, and prefectural city, was more than 20 miles. If he only relied on walking, it would take him more than 2 hours to get there. However, it seemed that it was useless to buy a carriage. Some mountain roads were rugged and inconvenient, so a carriage couldn't pass. No wonder Willow Village was so poor before he came. They didn't even understand the principle of, to get rich, build roads first. They guarded a few acres of barren land and lived in isolation for decades. It would be strange if they could get rich. After drinking a cup of tea to quench his thirst, he asked the tea stall owner. He didn't expect that the owner really knew where the broker house was and enthusiastically pointed out the direction for Li Yi. The broker house in this era was equivalent to the 58 cities in the future. Renting houses, buying and selling maids and servants were all within the scope of the business of the broker house. In the broker house, there was no need to worry about encountering illegal agents, because all the brokers were registered by the government and had a certificate. Once someone complained about them, they would be sued. According to the tea stall owner's guidance, Li Yi soon found the broker house. As soon as he entered the gate, several people surrounded him. Master, do you want to rent a house or buy maids? Master, I grew up in the prefecture and am very familiar with this place. No matter what you want, I'm sure you will be satisfied. Master. The guys in the broker house were all very enthusiastic. This scene was a little similar to the time when Li Xian took him to the brothel last time. However, it was no wonder that they were so enthusiastic. In this line of work, how much they earned depended entirely on their performance. If a customer wanted to inquire about something here, they had to pay a certain fee. Their wages came from this fee, and the more customers they attracted, the more their commission would naturally be. If they met a generous person, as long as the customer was satisfied, they would naturally reward them with money. The young master in front of them looked extraordinary, so he must be a big customer. These middlemen had dealt with all kinds of people all year round, so they were quite good at judging people. Li Yi casually picked a smart-looking guy. The others couldn't help but show disappointment on their faces, but they could only retreat helplessly. Young master, what do you need? Don't hesitate to tell me. I will definitely satisfy you. The waiter rubbed his hands together and said with a smile. I need to rent a shop in the prefecture, a moderate size, preferably in a bustling area. How about the rent here? Li Yi didn't beat around the bush and said straightforwardly. The waiter was obviously very familiar with this. He said without thinking, if it's in an ordinary area, the rent of an ordinary shop is about 100 taels. If you want to rent a shop in a bustling area, I'm afraid it will cost at least 300 taels of silver. This price was not much different from what Li Yi had expected. However, 300 taels of silver was not a small number after all. After the shop was rented, it would definitely need to be renovated, which would cost at least dozens of taels of silver. In this way, there would not be enough money to buy the raw materials for making ruidu. 300 taels of silver is a little expensive. Li Yi smiled, took out a piece of broken silver from his arms, and put it on the table in front of the waiter. The broken silver was at least 1 tael. Seeing this, the waiter's eyes suddenly lit up. He swept his sleeve across the table and the silver disappeared. When he looked at Li Yi again, the smile on his face became even more radiant. Young master, you have found the right person this time. I just happen to know of a shop in a bustling area that is urgently for sale. The price is about 20% lower than the market price. If young master is interested, I will take you there immediately. Reality proved that money could make the devil turn millstones. This saying had been used since ancient times. Most things in the world could be solved with money. If it couldn't, then it meant that the money you gave was not enough. 1 tael of silver was enough to make the waiter's attitude become extremely enthusiastic. He immediately took Li Yi to see the shop. The location of the shop was not bad. It was on the main street of the Qing and prefecture. Outside was the busy street. The shop was about 3 feet long and 6 feet wide. It could be considered spacious. More importantly, there was a small courtyard and 2 rooms at the back of the shop. According to the waiter, the family that originally did business here moved to the capital after their business became big, and the shop was left empty. However, this shop was located in the bustling area of the prefecture. If it was left empty, it would be too much of a waste. Therefore, they asked the broker to rent it out for them. Because they left in a hurry, the rent was much lower. As for the courtyard and rooms at the back of the shop, they were also given to them for free. After looking at the shop and the courtyard behind it, Li Yi started to feel uneasy. To be able to rent such a place for less than 300 taels of silver, it was almost no different from a pie falling from the sky. He looked at the waiter with some suspicion and asked, "Tell me honestly, is there something wrong with this shop? Was there a murder case? Or was there a ghost?" Hearing this, the waiter was stunned at first, and then he said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you have wronged me. Everything I said is true without any concealment. If you don't believe me, you can ask around." At this moment, the waiter felt bitter in his heart. 1 tael of silver was almost equivalent to a month's salary. If it wasn't for the fact that this young master had been so generous, he definitely wouldn't have mentioned such a good thing so easily. Forget it, forget it. Li Yi waved his hand. If there was really a problem here, the broker would not take such a hot potato. Moreover, one should be upright and not suspect others for no reason. At this time, a stout fat man came out from the cloth shop next door. Seeing this, Li Yi hurried to go up. "May I know your name? Are you the shopkeeper of this cloth shop?" The fat man nodded and looked at Li Yi with doubt. "My surname is Su. What can I do for you?" "Shopkeeper Su has been here for a long time. Have you heard that the shop next door is haunted?" The waiter just walked out of the shop and heard this. He couldn't help but stagger and almost fell. Chapter 99. Looking at the pale face of the fat man in front of him and the cold sweat on his forehead, it was obvious that he was not very brave. Li Yi more or less understood what was going on. This shop was definitely not haunted. Otherwise, the fat man would have moved out a long time ago. Since that was the case, he still had to take advantage of the situation. 250 taels of silver to rent a shop like this and a small villa with a courtyard in the first ring of Qing, and prefectural city. It was really a good deal. He immediately signed a contract with the middleman. The lease period was 1 year, and he readily took out 3 silver notes, each worth 100 taels of silver. Seeing this, the waiter's face was filled with ecstasy. His previous unhappiness had long been forgotten beyond the highest heavens. 250 taels of silver. Just the commission alone was enough for him to earn a few months' salary. However, when it was time to pay, the young master insisted on giving him 250 taels of silver and 1 copper coin. This made the shop assistant puzzled for a long time. Of course, perhaps this was the rich young master's hobby. This was not important to him. One handed over the money and the other handed over the goods. After an hour, Li Yi held the contract with the red seal of the government. He looked at the shop in front of him with satisfaction. For the next 1 year, the right to use this shop belonged to him. This was only a small step in his plan to make money. It was a big step out of the Willow Leaf village and into the prefectural city. Little brother, you just said, this shop is haunted. Is it true?" The fat shopkeeper leaned against the door of the cloth shop next door. He looked at Li Yi with a pale face and asked, "It's just a joke. Shopkeeper Su, don't take it seriously." Li Yi gave him a kind smile and turned to walk into the shop. Phew! The fat shopkeeper let out a long sigh of relief. His body slowly slid down from the door of the shop and collapsed on the ground. He raised his head and looked at Li Yi with eyes full of resentment. The matter of renting the shop was much smoother than Li Yi had imagined. He was also very satisfied with this shop. Of course, even though it was rented, it couldn't be put into use immediately. At the very least, it needed to be renovated carefully. As for how to decorate it, Li Yi hadn't thought about it yet. Moreover, Fong and the others were busy building the workshop recently, so he had to wait until they finished their work. After renting the shop, Li Yi was not in a hurry to go back. He closed the shop door and locked it. He strolled around the streets around the shop to familiarize himself with the environment. Speaking of which, the middleman was quite reliable. This area was almost at the center of Qing, and prefectural city. It was extremely prosperous with rows upon rows of shops. Restaurants and brothels could be seen in just a few steps. Not far from the shops was a market square. People came and went and it was very lively. Li also noticed that there was a brothel next to the shop. To put it bluntly, it was a modern theater. In this era without mobile phones, television, movies, and the internet, scholars strolled around the brothel and recited poems. This was the most common form of entertainment. As for ordinary people, they could only listen to storytelling and plays. The brothel was the main performance venue for these entertainment programs. In the future, if he was bored, he could often go there to sit, drink a cup of tea and listen to a few tunes to kill time. This was not a bad idea. Of course, the current him didn't have the leisure to do so. Brother Lu, look, isn't that the person from that day? When Li passed by a brothel, 3 young men happened to walk out. One of them raised his head and looked at the figure in front of him. His expression was startled. Then he immediately pointed at him and said to the person beside him, "Yes, Brother Lu, isn't that the person who insulted Fong Wentian and made Brother Lu lose face?" The person beside him looked in the direction he was pointing and exclaimed, "It's him." The man who was called Brother Lu looked at the young scholar who walked past them and his face couldn't help but turn gloomy. That day at the poetry meet, he had taken a liking to the other's servant girl. What could he do? The other was unwilling to exchange and completely disregarded him, the son of the county magistrate. Although with his vengeful personality he would not let this matter go, there were so many people present that day. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't do anything. At the mid-autumn poetry meet, he heard that the person had written some good poems that even Xianxia had to concede defeat. These days, the popularity of the person seemed to surpass Yang Yanzhou and become the #1 scholar in Qing'an Prefecture. He had a grudge against him, so naturally he was extremely unhappy. Later, although he had investigated him, he didn't find anything. He guessed that the other had no background and wanted revenge. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the person. After a few days, he had almost forgotten about this matter. Who would have thought that he would run into him here today? Follow them. The youth surnamed Lu said coldly and quickly followed them. This was a rare opportunity. If he let the other escape this time, he didn't know when he would meet him again. Although the safest method was to find some people first, there was clearly no time for that. Furthermore, the other was only one person. They had 3 people and had the advantage in numbers, so they were not afraid of him. The 2 people beside him looked at each other. There was a trace of hesitation in their eyes, but they still followed. At the same time, Li, who was walking on the street, suddenly frowned and his footsteps slowed down. It was not good to make a move in the busy streets. The 3 people quickly stopped and pretended to look around. A wastrel and 2 scholars. Their tracking skills were really clumsy and their acting was terrible. No matter what, Li had been taught by the 2 heroines. Very quickly he felt that someone was following him. He turned his head to look. The exaggerated acting skills of the 3 people were especially eye-catching in the crowd. A trace of a smile appeared on his lips. His footsteps quickened and he walked forward with large strides. Seeing this, the 3 people hurriedly chased after him. This time he didn't choose a place with many people. After a few turns he walked into a deserted alley. When the youth surnamed Lu saw this, a trace of joy appeared on his face. He was worried about where to make a move. He didn't expect that the other party would take the initiative to walk to such a place. He gave the 2 people beside him a look and they nodded. Their figures suddenly rushed out and blocked in front of Li. "What do you want?" Hearing the scholar's panicked voice, a trace of joy appeared on the youth surnamed Lu's face. He said, "What are you waiting for? Make a move." "In broad daylight you actually dare to hit people?" The scholar's voice seemed to be even more panicked. The youth surnamed Lu walked to the front and sneered at Li. He said, "So what if I hit you? Did anyone see it?" When the youth surnamed Lu said this, the 3 people saw the scholar's expression freeze for a moment. After looking around, a trace of a smile actually appeared on his face. Chapter 100. In broad daylight, deep alleyways with few people in sight, he looked at the 3 people surrounding him. Their faces were dark, their footsteps were unsteady, and their legs were unsteady. One look and he could tell that their bodies had been emptied by alcohol and women. He had the right time, the right place, and the right people. Moreover, no matter what, he was still the disciple of these 2 peerless heroines. As a young hero of the martial arts world, If he couldn't even deal with these three small fries, how would he have the face to learn martial arts from them in the future? He wouldn't even be able to dream of becoming a lowly martial artist in the martial arts world. If Lu Rui were to find out, he would laugh himself to death. You can still smile when you're at death's door. Seeing the smile on the scholar's face, the youth surnamed Lu felt insulted and rushed forward with his fist. Of course, he was only saying it casually. If someone really died, even if his father was the county magistrate of Anxi, he wouldn't be able to protect him. The two scholars beside him hesitated for a moment when they saw him making a move, but they still dashed forward as well. Although scholars weren't good at fighting, the county magistrate's son had already stepped forward. If they still stood here, they wouldn't have a good time afterward. The three people rushed over aggressively, but Li Yi wasn't afraid at all. Instead, his eyes flashed with excitement. Although he knew that his skills had improved a lot over the past few days, he had never really fought with anyone. Challenging Rui to spar was simply courting death. As for challenging Fong, that fellow didn't know how to control his strength. Li Yi wasn't at ease. At this moment, he finally had a chance to put his plan into practice. He dodged the youth surnamed Lu's punch and swung his elbow at the youth's back. Bam! The youth surnamed Lu didn't expect this scholar to be so agile. Caught off guard, he took a heavy blow to his back and staggered. Before he could turn his head, Li Yi had already kicked his buttocks. Thump! Although he didn't kick someone far away like Fong and the others, he still made him lose his balance and fall to the ground. At this moment, the two scholars had already rushed over. Li Yi turned his head and a smile appeared on his face. He faced them fearlessly. After a while, Don't come over. Including the youth surnamed Lu, the three with bruised and swollen faces looked at the scholar who was slowly walking towards them with a trembling voice. Li Yi rubbed his slightly aching fist. The effective force was mutual. He was not like Lu Rui, who had the protection of true qi. His fist was also aching after beating up these three guys. However, even though his fist was a little painful, his heart was filled with lofty sentiments as he looked at the three people in front of him. No wonder everyone said that he was a weak scholar. If the fighting strength of all the scholars in the world was so weak, then he alone could take on a group of them. The only troublesome thing was that the guy in the lead seemed to be the son of the county magistrate. It didn't seem good to beat him up. After all, Li Yi would probably have to stay in the prefecture for a long time in the future. It wasn't a wise thing to make enemies with this kind of person. However, since the enmity had already been formed, it was useless to regret it now. If there was no other way, he could only look for Li Xian and give him 2 poems to deceive little girls. Based on his character, he would probably agree immediately. Are you done fighting? Just as Li Yi was planning to do so, a faint voice came from behind him. The voice was crisp and pleasant to the ear. Li Yi turned his head and saw a woman leaning against the wall at the entrance of the alley. She was wearing the uniform of a constable and was looking at him with a teasing gaze. The woman was extremely beautiful with an exquisite figure and a valiant and heroic bearing. It was just that the uniform of a constable was a little out of place, causing Li Yi to feel a little uneasy. However, when he saw that it was only one person and a woman at that, he finally felt relieved. I'm done fighting. Li Yi nodded and looked for an opportunity to escape. Since you're done fighting, follow me back to the yamen. The woman straightened her body and said calmly as she slowly walked toward him. Constable Li, hurry up and catch him. How dare you hit me? You're dead meat. The appearance of the woman caused the fear on the young man's face to disappear instantly. He immediately pointed at her and said. At this moment, the way he looked at Li Yi became ferocious again. Once they reached the yamen, it would be his territory. Although his father had explicitly forbidden him from using his identity as the son of the county magistrate to bully others, none of the constables dared to disrespect him. Once they reached the yamen, all he needed to do was say the word and this guy would be in for a beating. The woman walked in front of the three and said calmly, "The 3 of you follow me back." What? The young man was stunned and asked in disbelief, "You want to catch us too? Fighting in the street, why don't you catch us?" Looking at her expressionless words, the young man was stunned for a moment. Then his face was filled with grief and indignation. How did they fight? They were obviously being beaten. Didn't they see that they were the ones being beaten? Are you blind? Is there any law? Of course, he would not dare to ask such a question even if he was given 10 guts. After all, although the woman in front of him was only a constable in the yamen, which constable would talk to the county magistrate with caution. As early as the first day he came to the yamen, his father had repeatedly warned him that he could offend anyone in the yamen, except for this madam. If it were any other constable, he would have already scolded them. But at this moment he could only endure the grievance in his heart. His eyes inadvertently glanced around and saw that the scholar who beat them just now was about to slip out of the alley. His expression immediately changed and he pointed at him. "He's running away." When the female constable turned around, she saw the figure of the scholar just now disappear from the alley. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. After taking a big detour, Li could not help but sigh in his heart when he reached the street again. The constables here were really competent. Every time something happened they could arrive in time. If the efficiency of the police in the future was half as good as theirs, how harmonious and stable would society be? But fortunately the constable just now was only a woman. Otherwise he really would not be able to escape today. A woman should stay at home and do embroidery. Why did she come out to be a constable? Would she be able to get married in the future? Why don't you take a detour? Before Li had time to think about whether the female constable would be able to get married or not, he suddenly heard a slightly familiar voice behind him. His face slightly stiffened and the next moment he broke into a run without hesitation. Whoosh! A beautiful figure fell from the sky and landed gracefully in front of him, blocking his way. Looking at the woman in front of him who was looking at him with a playful expression, Li Yi's face became a little bitter. "I'm doomed. I didn't expect this female constable to be a master." Chapter 101. Walking on the wide main street of Qing and Prefecture once again, Li Yi's mood was completely different. The women in this world were not to be trifled with. This was the conclusion that Li Yi came to after living here for so long. Any random woman he met on the street could be a hidden heroine whose martial arts were frighteningly high. When that woman descended from the sky and blocked his way, Li Yi knew that he couldn't leave today. He regretted not bringing Fong with him today. Even if he came out with Lu Rui he wouldn't end up like this. Luckily he wasn't alone. The son of the county magistrate and the two young scholars were standing next to him, looking dejected. They would occasionally turn their heads to glare at Li Yi fiercely, but when they saw the beautiful constable, they would quickly turn their heads back. The county yamen wasn't a good place to be, especially when one was caught for fighting. Luckily, this female constable didn't even give face to the son of the county magistrate. She could be considered as impartial. Fighting could be big or small. At this level it was at most disturbing the peace. A fine of a few taels of silver was the most they could do. However, if the county magistrate wanted to make things difficult for him because of his son, things would be a little difficult. At that time he might really have to use the name of Prince Ning to stabilize the situation first. On the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, Zhou Xian once patted his chest and said that in this prefecture, if anyone encountered any problems they could look for him. Li didn't take it to heart at that time. Now that he thought about it, the little prince really had a crow's mouth. The female constable followed behind them. When her beautiful eyes swept across Li Yi's body, there would occasionally be a flash of surprise. The scholar in front of her looked gentle and weak, but judging from his movements he seemed to have some foundation in martial arts. This wasn't common among scholars. Of course, this wasn't what puzzled her. Although it was rare for scholars to practice martial arts, it wasn't enough to surprise her. The reason why she paid more attention to the scholar was that she had never seen his martial arts style before. Because of her family background, she did not dare to say that she had read all the martial arts in the world, but her knowledge was extraordinary. Even if she could not name all the martial arts in Jianghu, she could still tell the way. However, the move that the scholar used just now was extremely strange. It was completely different from the various martial arts in Jianghu, but it was definitely not a random move. This made her a little curious. If Li Yi had known that the reason this female constable had brought him to the yamen was because she was curious about his martial arts, he would never have used Tai Chi to tease these three fellows. Naturally, the Taiji moves in the Library of Heaven's Path had been simplified. They might be able to strengthen one's body, but it was impossible for one to become a Taiji expert. A few days ago he practiced Tai Chi in the morning just for fun. However, ever since he taught Tai Chi to Lu Rui, She would occasionally dismantle the moves and add some variations to them. Then she would give them back to Li Yi. This made this set of martial arts that was used by uncles and aunties in the later generations to have some offensive power. Tai Chi was a martial art that used the weak to defeat the strong, and used softness to overcome hardness. It required less strength, which was suitable for the current Li Yi. As for the improved moves, he didn't stop practicing them. "Hey Emmingzu, where are you going?" The female constable was pondering over the moves that the scholar used just now. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind her. The young and handsome man caught up from behind and asked her with a smile. The woman frowned and said, "Back to the yamen." She didn't hear anything for a long time. Seeing that the other party wasn't pestering her like before, she was puzzled. When she looked up, she found that the young man was staring straight ahead. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He quickly walked to the scholar and said, "Why are you here? How do they know each other?" Seeing this scene, a hint of confusion appeared on the woman's pretty face. Li Yi had never felt like this before. The face of the young prince Li Xian was so amiable. "You know each other?" He pointed at the female constable and looked at Li Xian with anticipation. "Yes." Li Xian looked at him and asked with some confusion, "When did you and my cousin know each other?" "Cousin?" Li Yi was finally relieved. They were all from the old Li family, so the distance between them had been greatly shortened. However, since she was Li Xian's cousin, she was also from the royal family. But how could a member of the royal family be a constable? "Are you done? If you are, then follow me back to the yamen." The confusion on the female constable's face disappeared in a flash. Then she resumed her indifferent expression. "Back to the yamen?" Li Xian was stunned. He turned to look at her and asked, "What crime did he commit?" "It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding." As soon as Li Yi opened his mouth, the female constable waved her hand. "Don't talk nonsense. If you have anything to say, we can talk back to the yamen." Li Xian looked at her, then turned back to look at Li Yi. Whether it was because of their personal relationship or some other reason, he could not sit back and do nothing about what happened today. He quickly walked over and whispered a few words into the woman's ear. The female constable frowned at first, but after a while her brows relaxed and she looked at Li Yi in surprise. Aunt's chronic illness was cured by the person in front of her. She did not want to make things difficult for him by bringing him back to the yamen. She could ignore Li Xian's reputation, but she still had to consider Uncle Wang's. As she pondered, there was a sudden commotion in the crowd in front of her. "This silver is mine." "Nonsense, it's obviously mine." The faint sound of two people arguing could be heard. Someone in the crowd glanced over and suddenly shouted, "There's a constable over there. Let the constable be the judge." Yes, let the constable be the judge. When they saw a person dressed in a constable's uniform, there was a commotion in the crowd and they immediately rushed over. A few men who had been following Li Xian from afar looked at each other and immediately walked over. They spread out around him and paid attention to any movements in their surroundings. "Lord Constable, you have to uphold justice for this lowly one." A man dressed in coarse cloth grabbed the arm of a scholarly man and walked over to the woman's side as he pleaded. "What exactly happened?" the female constable asked with a frown. "My lord, this lowly one was eating noodles at the noodle stall and accidentally dropped the silver on the ground. This person picked it up, and when this lowly one discovered it, I asked him to return it. However, he insisted that the silver was his to begin with." The man looked anxious. "My mother is seriously ill, and this is money for her to buy medicine to save her life. We can't lose it." "What a load of nonsense." The scholarly man glanced at the man and said, "This silver is clearly mine. Don't you dare try to extort me, you scoundrel." After the two of them spoke, the surrounding crowd chimed in one after another. Some agreed with the man, while others stood on the scholarly man's side. The woman rubbed the space between her brows as she listened to the crowd's chatter. She couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. She didn't know which of the two men was telling the truth, but this matter was really hard to determine. Catching a thief was more like it, but solving a case wasn't something she was good at. "Miss, why don't we make a deal?" At that moment, a weak voice was heard from beside her. Chapter 102. A Deal. Emmingzu turned her head and looked at the scholar with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She said lightly, "What kind of deal?" I'll help you solve the case in front of you and you let me go. Then we're even. Li Yi looked at her and said. Li Xian pulled his sleeve and whispered, do you really know who this silver belongs to? He knew his cousin's character very well. It would be fine if Li Yi didn't say anything. If he found out that he had fooled her in the end, it would not be easy to solve today's matter. Li Yi gave him a reassuring look and Li Xian didn't speak anymore. Although he didn't know how to judge who this silver belonged to, since he knew Li Yi, everything he did was unexpected. He didn't know what method Li Yi had thought of at this moment and he began to look forward to it. What do you have in mind? Li Mingzhu's face showed an expression of interest. Usually, there was no other way to deal with this kind of ambiguous dispute in the county government. After a few floggings they would confess. There was no need to be so troublesome. He wanted to see what the scholar could do. It's very simple. Since we can't tell who this silver belongs to, we can just split it in half. Everyone will be happy. Li Yi took out 2 pieces of silver from his bosom, each about half a tael. He snatched the silver from the Confucian scholar's hand and stuffed them into the bosom of the burly man and the Confucian scholar. Seeing this scene, the young prince, Li Xian, couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. This method was really simple and crude. But could his cousin pass it? Sure enough, when he turned his head and peeped, he found that the scholar's face became a little ugly. The young man surnamed Lu and the other 2 stood aside and watched the scene. Seeing this, they almost couldn't help laughing. If everything could be solved in this way, why did they need the county magistrate? Isn't this a mess? What kind of method is this? This scholar is just messing around. How can he solve a case like this? Seeing this, the onlookers immediately became noisy, one after another, talking at the same time. Sir, you mustn't do that. If I lose half of the money, I won't be able to buy my mother's medicine. The burly man's face immediately revealed a pleading expression as he looked at Mingzhu and said, this young master's words are reasonable. A scholar should have a magnanimous heart. I won't argue with a scoundrel like you. How about I give you half of the silver? When the Confucian scholar heard this, a trace of joy appeared on his face and he immediately said, is this the solution you mentioned? Mingzhu turned to look at Li Yi. A dangerous glint flashed in her eyes. Of course, if not. Li Yi smiled, looked at her and said calmly, there is only one truth. He suddenly turned around and pointed his finger at the Confucian scholar, shouting, murderer. Bah. He's the one who lied. The situation changed so quickly that no one in the crowd could react. While the Confucian scholar was still in a daze, Li Yi had already snatched the silver fragment from his hand and stuffed it into the burly man's arms along with the silver ingot. Be careful next time. Take these 2 silver fragments as well. Buy your mother's medicine quickly. Li Yi was not a generous person, but if the burly man had not lost the silver, he might have been taken to the county government by the female arrestor. It was rare for her to be generous to him. What's going on? The young prince Li Xian was confused and still in a daze. The onlookers also started to ask questions. Why are you so sure that he's the one who lied? I can't figure it out. Everyone looked at Li Yi, waiting for his explanation. Mingzhu's pretty face showed a trace of doubt and some realization. She also turned to look at him. Nonsense. Why are you so sure that I'm the one who lied? The Confucian scholar's face showed a trace of panic, but it was soon replaced by grief and indignation. He looked at Li Yi as if he was really wronged. Because the silver originally belonged to this burly man, so of course he didn't want to give half of it to others for no reason. Li Yi smiled and pointed at the Confucian scholar, saying, and because the silver didn't belong to him, he could get half of it for no reason. Of course he agreed so readily. Hearing his explanation, Li Xian's face showed a look of realization. He looked at him in surprise. How did he come up with such an ingenious way to solve the case? And the pretty Mingzhu next to Li Yi also looked at him differently for the first time. After hearing Li Yi's words, the crowd was stunned for a moment, then they immediately burst into an uproar. This young master's words make sense. Brilliant, really brilliant. I was almost cheated by this guy just now. I almost wronged this burly man. In an instant the way everyone looked at Li Yi changed. Their gazes were filled with respect and admiration. When they turned to look at the Confucian scholar, their faces were filled with disdain. What a disgrace to a scholar. As a scholar, how could he do such a despicable thing? He even cheated his mother of money to save her life. Is he still human? Take him to the magistrate. At this moment the Confucian scholar's face finally showed panic. When he raised his head to look at Li Yi, his heart was filled with grief and indignation. Trap, it was all a trap. So the other party had set a trap for him from the beginning, waiting for him to fall into it. But at this moment he naturally couldn't admit it. With a wronged expression he said loudly, "This is just your deduction. I didn't expect that my momentary kindness would be taken advantage of by a villain. I'm not convinced. I want to go to the county government. I want to see the county magistrate." Not convinced? Li Yi narrowed his eyes. Are you really not convinced? I'm not convinced. The Confucian scholar raised his head and looked at him with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Smack. Li Yi slapped his head. Are you convinced? The Confucian scholar didn't expect that this scholar would dare to hit him on the street. He was stunned. When he came to his senses he pointed at him with a trembling finger. How dare you hit me? So what if I hit you? Li Yi frowned and slapped him again. Are you convinced? No. Are you convinced? Ouch. I'm not convinced even if you beat me to death. Seeing Li Yi slap the Confucian scholar's head again, the crowd was stunned on the spot. The corner of young Prince Li Xian's mouth twitched again. As for the young man with the surname Lu and the other two, they seemed to have thought of something bad and their faces all darkened. On the other hand, the female constable crossed her arms and looked at the scene with interest. She didn't seem to want to stop it at all. Are you convinced? After countless slaps, even his hands were a little numb. The Confucian scholar finally couldn't take it anymore. Stop hitting me. I'm convinced. I picked up the silver on the street. At this moment the Confucian scholar only felt that his head was getting bigger and he was dizzy. With tears in his eyes he said, I lost all my money in the gambling house this morning. When I passed by that man I saw the silver fall from his arms, so I got the idea. Please stop hitting me. Seeing that the Confucian scholar finally admitted it, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and withdrew his hand. He straightened his body and looked at the female constable with a smile. Look, he admitted it. Chapter 103. Thank you, young master. Thank you for upholding justice for me. The man held the silver in his hand and bowed to Li Yi with a flushed face. When Li Yi proposed to split the silver, the man was still complaining about him. Now that he knew it was all part of Li Yi's plan, he felt very guilty. This young master was helping him, but he doubted him just now. He shouldn't have. Li Yi smiled at the man and turned to the female constable. He cupped his hands and said, The case has been solved. I'll take my leave now. Just as he was about to walk out of the crowd, he saw the woman suddenly reach out to grab him. Li Yi was startled. His feet curved in an arc. Just as the woman's hand was about to grab him, he used a push hand, causing her wrist to turn at an angle. Naturally, this grab missed. After personally experiencing this strange martial art, a look of astonishment appeared on the woman's face once again. You didn't keep your promise. Li Yi took the opportunity to take a step back and pointed at her angrily. When did I say that I would let you go? The woman looked at him and said indifferently. Just now you. Li Yi only said a few words before he said nothing else. After thinking for a while, he realized that she really didn't say that. Boss, what happened? A few constables ran over from afar. When they saw the county magistrate's son standing there with a swollen face, they were shocked and turned to ask the woman. Bring them back to the yamen. The female constable pointed at the young man with the surname Lu and the other two. Then she pointed at the Confucian scholar who was still standing at the side with his hands on his head. Immediately the constables restrained them. Young master, I'm sorry. A constable walked to the young man with the surname Lu and said in a low voice. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder symbolically. Compared to the county magistrate's son, he was obviously more unwilling to provoke the female constable. Seeing that she didn't point at Li Yi, the young man with the surname Lu widened his eyes and said with great grief and indignation, Where is he? The female constable ignored him and said indifferently, Take him away. Yes. Although the constables didn't know what happened, they still responded respectfully and escorted the few people to the yamen. This is not fair. You're condoning and shielding. Is there still any law? the voice of the youth surnamed Lu gradually faded away. The female constable glanced at Li Yi but didn't say anything else. She turned around and left in a carefree manner. He turned around and said to Li Xian, "Thank you very much for what you did today." Seeing that the powerful woman had left, Li Yi finally let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Li Xian. He was a little impulsive today. If he hadn't met Li Xian, he would have been in trouble. Darn it. Li Xian smiled and suddenly said, "However, if you feel that you owe me a favor and feel bad about it, why don't you give me a few poems?" Li 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 Yu Xian, Li Li King Yu Li Li, Li 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 of. Li Li Xian said. Li Li Xian Li Li. But if you feel bad about owing me a favor, why don't you give me a few poems? Li Xian shook his head. Li Yi was stunned. What do you mean by the Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar? The young prince Li Xian looked around. Seeing that the crowd hadn't dispersed, he said, "This isn't a good place to talk. Let's find a quiet place and talk while we drink." Hearing Li Xian's words, the expressions of the people scattered around him changed. After a while, in a restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture in a private room, Li Xian looked at Li Yi in surprise and asked, "You really don't know?" Li Yi drank a cup of tea to moisten his throat and replied, "I really don't know." He really didn't know when he became the #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom that Li Xian mentioned. That, Immortal of the Magpie Bridge, was it really written by you? Li Xian asked again. "Brother Xiaoyu, please forgive me, please forgive me." Li Yi prayed in his heart and nodded shamelessly. "You really can't judge a book by its cover. I didn't think that your literary talent would be so high." Li Xian looked at him with a different expression. Although the title of Jing Kingdom's #1 scholar was only known in Qing'an Prefecture and hadn't been recognized by all the scholars in the world, to be able to make those old men act like this, it was already extremely impressive. After all, even though he was a young prince, he had only received the evaluation of rotten wood cannot be carved from them. Thinking about how this fellow could receive such an evaluation from those arrogant old men, he couldn't help but feel a little indignant. "So what if I'm rotten wood? Did I beg you to carve me? You're really crazy." Of course, these words could only be said in his heart and he absolutely didn't dare to say it out loud. "What do you mean by you can't judge a book by its cover?" Li Yi looked at Li Xian with a strange expression. Did he even know how to converse? Moreover, although he missed that face that he had seen for 20 years, he had to admit that in terms of appearance the current one was still a little better. Even if it was Li Xian himself, he wouldn't dare to say that he was more handsome than him, right? "Among the women who invited you that day, there were famous courtesans from Qing'an Prefecture, a Mingzhu from the rich and powerful families, and even the daughter of the prefectural magistrate. After that night, who knows how many famous courtesans from the brothels said that they were willing to sleep with you." As he spoke, the young Prince Li Xian's face was full of envy. Li Yi's expression was a little dazed. Did this mean that if he went to sleep with him he wouldn't have to pay if he went to the brothels in the future? He looked up at the opposite side and got a positive answer from Li Xian's face. In that case he didn't have to work hard to sell candied haws, floral water and so on. Now he could sell autographs and portraits to make money. If a poem was written on the portrait, the price might even be doubled. This was a business that was almost guaranteed to be profitable. As he thought of this, the scene of being surrounded by women that day suddenly appeared in his mind. The expression on Li Yi's face froze and he immediately dispelled this idea. One shouldn't be too ambitious. It was better to do business down to earth and be a quiet and handsome man. "Tell me, when will my cousin treat me like those women treat you? How good would that be?" Li Xian seemed to have triggered something in his heart. He showed a look of longing and muttered to himself. Li Yi suddenly looked up at him and couldn't believe his ears. "Cousin? That female constable just now? Li Xian, this guy actually likes his cousin?" At this moment, his mind had automatically filled in the scenes of a vigorous moral drama. When he looked at him again, the expression in Li Yi's eyes changed for the first time. It was as if he was looking at a beast. An ill-fated relationship. Chapter 104. A cousin marrying a younger cousin and a younger cousin marrying a younger cousin. If this had happened in the future, not only would the law not allow it, but even if they had such an idea, they would still have their legs broken by the parents of the two parties. But in today's era, it was a very normal thing. The saying cousin and younger cousin are a match made in heaven had existed since ancient times. The ancients, who did not have the concept of genes and heredity, thought this was adding family to family. Thus, such a twisted complex was created. After thinking through this matter, the strange look in Li Yi's eyes slowly disappeared. He let out a long sigh. Child, the fault is not on you, the fault is on this world. However, it seemed that in the ancient times of his original world, cousins could marry but cousins could not. Although the people of that era were still lacking in scientific knowledge, the concept of ethics and morality was more profound than that of the later generations. Cousins were considered to be very closely related by blood, so they were definitely not allowed to get married. If anyone dared to have any ideas about their cousin, they would still have their legs broken. Could it be that the people of this world did not have such an understanding? When he became more familiar with Zhou Xian, he wanted to find a chance to remind him. If the two of them really did get married in the future and gave birth to an idiot or a child with some kind of birth defect, Li Yi would really feel apologetic. That's right, where do you live? Why can't so many people in Qing and Fu find you? Even the daughter of Magistrate Dong couldn't find you after using the power of the government. Li Xian looked at him and suddenly remembered something. He had been puzzled about this matter for a long time. That time when he cured his mother's depression, Ning Wangfu had also sent people to search for him, but to no avail. There were quite a few people named Li Yi in the records of the government, but after investigating them one by one, they found that none of them were the person they were looking for. There was one person whose age and identity matched, but when they sent people to ask, they found that the scholar named Li Yi had lost his mind not long ago. After running out of the village, he had never returned. The villagers searched everywhere but to no avail. They had already reported him to the government and listed him as a missing person. Losing his mind, naturally it wouldn't be him. He lives in a remote area outside the city. It's normal that he can't find him, Li Yi replied. Li Xian seemed to think of something and said, in a few days it will be my mother's birthday. You should come with us. Last time you cured my mother's illness, the whole mansion has not properly thanked you. The people who would attend Wang Fei's birthday would definitely be people of status in Qing and prefectural city. Why would he go? Li Yi had originally wanted to find a reason to refuse, but after some thought an idea suddenly popped into his mind. After a moment of hesitation he still nodded his head. There are still some days before my mother's birthday. Tell me your address and I'll send someone to invite you. Forget it, we'll talk about this later. Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him with an expectant expression. He said, let's talk about how many poems you are going to give me. Clearly this was still on Li Xian's mind. Are you so sure that your cousin likes things like poems? Li Yi sighed and looked at him as he asked. He always thought that his emotional intelligence was low enough. He didn't think that there would be a weirdo whose emotional intelligence was even lower than his. These women, don't they all like poems? Li Xian raised his head to look at him and asked with a stunned expression. Those so-called scholars in Qing and prefectural city often used a few poems to trick the hearts of those women. Wasn't it because they all liked this kind of style? Putting aside the distant, once the immortals of the Magpie Bridge and Shuidiao Getu appeared, who knew how many women in Qing and prefectural city secretly admired Li Yi? Didn't this mean something? Li Yi looked at him like he was looking at an idiot. You've known her for so long, have you ever seen her talk about poems in front of you? The expression on Li Xian's face froze. After thinking for a moment he shook his head and said, I don't think so. The women of the world all have different appearances and different personalities. How can they be lumped together? They are actually the same as men. There are those who revere literature and those who revere martial arts. Which type do you think she is? Although Li Yi had only met the female bailiff once, he had some understanding of her personality. Her martial arts were so high that she was probably the same type Rui and Rui. Those who revere martial arts usually look down on scholars who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. She was far from those young ladies of noble families who could win their hearts with just a few words of romance. On the other side, after hearing Li Yi's words, Li Xian's expression had become serious. He seemed to have sunk into deep thought. Li Yi stood up and patted his shoulder. When pursuing a woman you can't be too hasty. First you need to understand her likes and dislikes. Acting rashly will only produce the opposite of the desired result. As the words left his mouth, he felt that something was amiss. Was he teaching Li Xian how to woo a woman? Woo his cousin? In that case he was actually helping him in his sin. At this moment, Li Xian's face revealed a look of realization. When he looked at Li Yi again, his expression had changed considerably. He cupped his hands and said, "Listening to a wise man's words is better than reading books for 10 years. You are the true expert in this field. I should have known that you would be able to conquer such a beautiful wife's younger sister. Admirable, admirable." Li Yi's expression darkened again. He felt that he could no longer continue the conversation with this fellow. After the conversation, Li Xian was no longer concerned about how many poems Li Yi should give him in return for his kindness. He turned his attention to something else. Before they parted, he once again reminded Li Yi that the next time they met, they must have a good conversation. What was the matter with the psychology of women, and 36 ways to woo a woman, that Li Yi had mentioned? The address that Li Yi left behind was not the Willow Leaf Stockade. At that time, the shops in the prefectural city would probably be open for business. He could go there directly to find him. As for the fact that Li Yi had opened a shop in Qingyan Prefecture, Li Xian was still somewhat surprised. Scholars, farmers, merchants had low status. Generally speaking, scholars were disdainful of doing business, thinking that it would lower their status. Many high officials and nobles were like Ning Wangfu. Although they also had business outside, they would never stand in the open and cooperate with those merchants. They would leave the public matters to them. However, he knew Li Yi's way of doing things. He had never been able to figure out Li Yi's way of doing things. He didn't seem like an orthodox scholar at all. If not for that, Li Xian might not have been interested in him in the first place. Of course, as for the Rui Du, that he had never heard of, Li Xian also had a strong curiosity in his heart. That strange painting and sugar-coated hawes, the things that he made were always unusual. He didn't know what the Rui Du was. When the time came, he must see it. Chapter 105. The shop in the prefectural city was about to open, and Li Yi planned to be the boss himself. After all, although the village was quiet and peaceful, it was perfect for retirement. However, he had not saved enough for retirement yet, so he had to work hard for a few more days. Of course, living in the village for too long would be boring. The prefectural city was bustling, and it was far more interesting than staying here. However, this reason was not as important as the previous one. As such, he naturally had to put aside the matter of the school. With his current influence in the village, he could already make decisions for such a small matter. Most of the direct descendants of the Lu family relied on him to make money, so they naturally had no objections. "Miss Qin, I'll have to trouble you to take care of these children in the future," said Li Yi as he cupped his hands and bowed to a seemingly weak young girl at the entrance of the school. The young girl's surname was Qin and her first name was Qing. She looked a little delicate, and her body exuded a faint scholarly aura. Qing's grandfather was Mr. Qin. Before Li Yi came here, he was the one who taught in the school. However, he accidentally fell and injured his leg a few days ago, so he would probably have to stay in bed for the rest of his life. After Li Yi left, the school still had to continue. In the future, the young girl in front of him would take over his position. She had been by Mr. Qin's side since she was young, so she could read and write. She could be considered one of the few cultured people in the village. Of course, there were still many people in the village who had doubts about how a woman could become a teacher. However, they had no say in this matter. Ever since they were able to establish a business relationship with Li Yi, they could not wait to build a good relationship with him. Perhaps one day when he was in a good mood, they could even waive some of the joining fees. Naturally, they would not oppose him on such a small matter. "Brother-in-law, can I really become a teacher?" The naughty children in the school did not see the two of them and were still playing around inside. The young girl glanced into the room, and a hint of hesitation appeared on her pretty face as she asked timidly. When Li Yi asked for her opinion, the young girl hesitated for a long time before agreeing. Firstly, it was because she really liked these things in her heart. Previously, when her grandfather was a teacher in the school, she often looked forward to when she could stand in that position. However, it was just a thought. After all, in this world, women could not do things as freely as men. Another reason was that they had received too much kindness from Li Yi in the past few days. It was impossible for her to refuse such a small matter. Their father passed away when they were young, and there were only their mother, daughter, and their elderly grandfather at home. Although life was hard before, they could still get by. However, after their grandfather accidentally broke his leg, life became more and more difficult. If it wasn't for Xiao Huan, who often brought him rice and noodles, he would have died a long time ago. Therefore, the girl's family was extremely grateful to them. Don't worry. It's just teaching them a few words every day. It's not that difficult. Li smiled. Out of habit, he wanted to reach out and pat her on the shoulder to show his encouragement. Halfway through, he realized that it was not appropriate. He retracted his hand and pointed to the inside of the school. Let's go in. Hearing this, the young girl nodded and followed behind Li Yi. After the two of them walked into the school, the originally unusually noisy naughty children immediately quieted down and obediently returned to their seats. Seeing that there was a beautiful older sister next to the teacher today, the naughty children's eyes immediately sized her up. Most of them knew that this older sister seemed to be Mr. Qin's family, but they didn't know why this older sister came with the teacher today. Today we won't be in class. Last time we talked about the story of Ho Yi shooting the sun. Today we will talk about Kwa Fu chasing the sun, Chong Yi flying to the moon, Jing Wei filling the sea. Qin Qing took the initiative to sit on the side. Li Yi's gaze swept across the school as he spoke. With this sentence, the naughty children's attention immediately shifted away from the young girl. Their faces revealed extreme excitement. In the past, as long as they performed well in class, the teacher would tell them a story after class. From those stories, they learned that heaven and earth used to be connected. There was a giant called Pangu who used an axe to split heaven and earth. The earliest people were molded from mud by goddess Nua. There used to be 10 suns in the sky, and a master archer called Ho Yi shot down 9 of them with his bow. These stories were like the monkey with the stick, deeply attracting the naughty children. Today the teacher was actually going to tell so many stories. To these naughty children, it was undoubtedly more joyous than the new year. When the young girl called Qin Qing heard the slow and magnetic voice, she turned her head and saw the naughty children's small faces that were focused on the story. Her heart seemed to be touched by something. These half-grown children were extremely mischievous and ran amok in the village. Who knew how much trouble they had caused her? At that moment, when she saw those innocent and extremely clear eyes, a seed was quietly planted in her heart. When she turned her head to look at Li Yi, she also longed for the day when she could be like this, loved and respected by these children. After a few stories were told, the naughty children still had expressions of reminiscence on their faces. Li Yi stood up and looked at them. From today onwards, Sister Qin will be teaching all of you in my place. You must be obedient like before. Don't bully her, understand? When the naughty children heard this, their expressions froze. Then they suddenly looked at Li Yi and looked a little flustered. Is the teacher leaving? Why is the teacher leaving? Did we make the teacher angry? Teacher, don't go. We will definitely be obedient. The naughty children were of different ages. The oldest was a little over 10 years old, while the youngest was only 7 or 8. When they heard that Li Yi was leaving, they all looked flustered. Seeing the naughty children suddenly become abnormally agitated, Li Yi felt a little warm in his heart. Even though these children were a little mischievous, they were still innocent children. After interacting with them for the past few days, it was naturally impossible to say that he didn't have any feelings for them. However, he couldn't be the teacher here for the rest of his life. He would have to leave sooner or later. This moment would come sooner or later. Li Yi stretched out his hand and pressed down. The naughty children's voices gradually became softer, but they still looked at him with expectant eyes. Lu Xiaohu. Li Yi opened his mouth and called out a name. The naughty child with the sturdiest physique immediately stood up from his seat. I'll leave the task of protecting Mr. Qin to you. Can you complete it? Lu Xiaohu's face revealed a serious expression. He suddenly patted his chest. Don't worry, sir. I guarantee that I will complete the task. If anyone dares to bully Mr. Qin, I will beat him up. Hello, Mr. Qin. Seeing the naughty children standing neatly and respectfully saluting her as a disciple, the young girl's heart finally relaxed. After walking out of the classroom, Li Yi turned to look at the young girl and said with a smile, I'll leave these children to you from now on. The teacher's allowance is 1 silver tael per month. When the time comes, I'll have Xiao Huan send it to you. The young girl was stunned for a moment. After regaining her senses, she hurriedly said, Absolutely not. I don't want any allowance. Besides, the teacher in the classroom has never. From now on there will be. Li Yi waved his hand. Without waiting for her to finish, he smiled and left. The young girl stared at his back in a daze. She couldn't calm down. After a long time she sighed and turned to walk back into the classroom. Chapter 106. It was the right decision to hand over the construction of the workshop to Fong. In just 5 days, a workshop that Li Yi was extremely satisfied with was completed. When it came to building houses, the men in the stockade were all experts. Even the houses that they were currently living in were built by them. Now that the workshop was completed, they only needed to purchase the raw materials before they could start producing a new batch of ruidu. Before this, Li Yi had spent all the money he had saved from renting the shop on renovating the shop. The floor was paved with wooden flooring and the counters, tables and chairs were all new and custom-made. On the walls around the counters, Li Yi had personally drawn a few landscape paintings. Of course, they were all 3D, and they were so lifelike that one would feel as if their eyes were about to sink into them. If someone were to walk into the shop, they would probably be stunned by these paintings at first glance. Since they had decided to go for the high-end route from the beginning, they could not be frugal in these areas. Even the porcelain bottles that contained the ruidu were very exquisite, and they had cost a lot of money when they were purchased. Seeing the money being spent like water, Fong often showed a pained expression on his face. If this business were to fail, his dream of having a beautiful wife and a big house would never come true. It was very likely that he would have to return to 2 months ago and continue to live a life of eating dirt. After all, he had a share of the shares of ruidu. Although he did not know what the shares were, Fong could still understand why his son-in-law said that he would have a share of the profits from ruidu. Son-in-law, have you thought about the name of the shop? Fong knew that he was not good at making money, so he changed the topic. I still need to think about it. Li Yi shook his head and said. The name of the shop was the signboard. Once it was decided, it could not be changed and the decision could not be made easily. Now all the preparations were in place and everything was ready. All that was missing was the name of the shop. Why don't we call it Six Gods Workshop? Li Yi raised his head and wanted to ask for everyone's opinion. Fong's face darkened. He couldn't understand why his son-in-law would fall in love with the name Six Gods. The young maidservant stood beside Li Yi and saw second young miss giving her a look. She immediately said, Son-in-law, I think it sounds better to call it Rui Fong. Rui Square. Li Yi looked at Lu Rui. This matter clearly had nothing to do with her. Why did she have to take advantage of him every time? If Rui's became popular in the Jing Kingdom in the future, and every major city had a Rui store, would people think of Lu Rui or him? No, this was a huge loss. Li Yi felt that it was better to call it Six Spirits Lane. For the sake of her being his sister-in-law, he had already given her a lot of face by naming the floral water in this world as Rui's dew. This time he was determined not to give in. Rui Fong. Fong muttered the name, shook his head and said, This name is not very good. We are doing serious business. Rui Fong. It sounds like a new brothel in the prefecture. Li Yi was keenly aware that as Fong spoke, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became subtle. Clang. This was the sound of a sword being unsheathed. Feeling the two cold eyes behind him, Fong couldn't help but shiver and cold sweat rolled down his forehead. It was only at this moment that he realized why he had a bad feeling when he spoke just now. He straightened his chest and his expression became solemn. He looked at Li Yi seriously and said, Young master, I suddenly feel that the name Rui Fong is very good. Since we are selling Rui's dew, the name of the store should naturally match it. I think there is no more suitable name than Rui Fong. Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he looked at the righteous Lao Fong. How did that resolute man from back then turn into such a person? I also think that it's better to call it Rui Fong, Lu Rui said with a smile. Although the name of the store was ultimately up to Li Yi, the public opinion was obviously on Lu Rui's side. Li Yi couldn't be arbitrary. He looked up at them and said, Are you really not going to consider Six Spirits Lane? In order to fully promote democracy, the name of the store was decided. On the same day, he and Fong ordered a signboard in the prefecture city. In order to further enhance the store's prestige, Li Yi found all of Wang Shiji's calligraphy in the library. After digesting them, he found the 3 words Ru, Yi, and Fong, and wrote them out personally. Of course, even if he had such a heaven-defying cheating device, he only needed to copy it. He wouldn't be able to reach Wang Shiji's level, but being able to copy 80 to 90% of it was enough to shock many people. At least, the shopkeeper who made the signboard was shocked by the elegant semi-cursive script. He had been running this ancestral shop for several decades and had made countless plaques. He had seen many authentic works of famous masters. Under the influence of what he had seen and heard, even though the shopkeeper's calligraphy skills were not very profound, few people could compare to him in terms of his ability to appreciate calligraphy. It was just 3 words, but it was enough to show that the calligraphy skills of the person who wrote it were profound. Without decades of practice, it would be impossible to achieve this. This level of skill could probably be compared with several calligraphy masters in the world. However, which one of those people didn't have decades of accumulation in order to achieve what they had today? If the scholar hadn't written in front of him, he definitely wouldn't believe that such wonderful calligraphy could be written by such a young man. Li Yi wasn't surprised by the shopkeeper's shocked expression. That was the sage of calligraphy, Wang Shiji, who had influenced Chinese calligraphy for more than 2,000 years. How could his calligraphy be ordinary? Of course, Li Yi was still very happy that the shopkeeper insisted on not taking his money. Now was the time for his career to start, so he should save as much as possible. The sage of calligraphy really deserved his reputation. Looking at the shopkeeper holding the piece of paper as if it was a treasure, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The opening of the new store was supposed to do some publicity and marketing, but Li Yi wasn't in a hurry to do that. He still had some confidence in Rui Lu. However, this confidence was shaken on the first day of the store's opening. After half a day, not even a bottle of Rui Lu was sold. A few people entered the store to take a look, but when they heard that such a small bottle of Rui Lu was sold for 1 tael of silver, they immediately left as if they were escaping before Li Yi introduced the function of Rui Lu. Could it be that I set the price too high? After half a day, even Li Yi began to doubt it. 1 tael of silver was not a small amount for most people in the prefecture. Although they could afford it, they wouldn't be so extravagant as to buy such a bottle of something they didn't know the function of. Where are the local tycoons? Li Yi sat behind the counter and saw that there were only him and the young maidservant in the entire store. He couldn't help but start to call out in his heart. The young maidservant sat by the table with one hand supporting her chin. She looked out of the door and watched the passers-by with boredom. At a certain moment, 2 figures stopped in front of the door for a moment and then walked in. The young maidservant came back to her senses and immediately stood up from the chair and ran over. "Ladies, welcome to Rui Workshop." She bowed and said with a clear voice. Chapter 107. Welcome. It was obvious that this was the first time the 2 young ladies had heard this greeting. Their expressions froze and a trace of astonishment appeared on their pretty faces. In a world that was filled with, "Please come in, what would you like to eat, what would you like to order, and what would you like to order," the words "welcome" from a pretty servant girl in a shop that they didn't know what it was selling was extremely refreshing and refined. The servant girl's attitude made them feel very comfortable. Just as they walked into the shop, their moods strangely became better. When they passed by the street earlier, they discovered that there was a new shop called Rui Square. They couldn't tell what it was selling from the shop's name, but the 3 words on the shop's signboard seemed to have the demeanor of a great family. It was very extraordinary, and compared to the other shops along the street, it was like a crane among a flock of chickens. This made the 2 ladies a little curious and they couldn't help but walk in. However, this extraordinary servant girl was only secondary. When the 2 ladies raised their heads and looked into the shop, their delicate bodies couldn't help but tremble. One of the ladies even covered her small mouth and almost cried out. They saw that there were many paintings hanging on the walls of the shop. What was strange was that in these paintings, whether it was the mountains, rivers, or people, they all looked like they were about to break out of the paintings. At first glance, even a normal person would be shocked. First, it was the elegant calligraphy. Now it was the extremely strange paintings. This caused the 2 ladies' curiosity towards this shop to increase greatly. "To Mrs. Please sit." The servant girl's voice was gentle. The 2 ladies walked to the side of the table and chairs. No matter whether it was the floor or the chairs, they were all spotless. The moment they sat down, the servant girl had already brewed fragrant tea and stood quietly to the side. After walking into the shop, no matter if it was the environment or the servant girl's attitude, they all felt that it was just right. They didn't feel cold or annoyed. It was quiet and comfortable. There seemed to be a unique fragrance in the air that made people feel relaxed and happy. Following the scent, the two ladies' gazes quickly focused on a porcelain bottle on the table. "What is this?" Confusion appeared in the eyes of the two women as they looked at the servant girl. "This item is called Rui Du. It's our shop's newest product. It has the effect of cooling, refreshing, repelling mosquitoes and relieving itching." A voice came from behind. The two girls turned around and saw a handsome young man walking out from behind the counter. He looked at them and said with a smile, "This young master is so handsome." Seeing the handsome young master with a jade-like face, the two women blushed slightly and thought to themselves, "May I ask, young master, how do I use this Rui Du?" She didn't expect the shopkeeper to be such a handsome young master. A woman stood up and said with a faint smile. Li Yi opened the porcelain bottle on the table and introduced it to them. "When bathing or washing clothes, put a few drops of Rui Du in it. It can cool down in summer and relieve itching in autumn. In addition, when washing every day, if you put a few drops of Rui Du in the water, it can also reduce the possibility of getting sick." The greatest effect of floral water was actually not repelling mosquitoes, but its sterilization function. It was just that the ancients did not have the concept of bacteria, and their awareness of hygiene was far from comparable with modern times. Li Yi could only change to a popular explanation. The two women had personally felt the refreshing effect of Rui Du. At this time, the woman who spoke just now asked again, "Young master said that this Rui Du can repel mosquitoes, is it true?" "Miss, you can try it. If it is false, I am willing to pay you back double the original price," Li Yi said with a smile. He had personally tried the effect of floral water. Although the conditions were limited and the effect could not be compared with the later generations, he was still very satisfied with the effect of repelling mosquitoes. When the woman heard the words, her face showed obvious interest. Since the beginning of autumn, mosquitoes were rampant. She would be bitten by mosquitoes almost every day. She did not know why. After the maids in the mansion were bitten, they would get a small bump and itch for a while. Whenever she was bitten, it would immediately become red and swollen. It was extremely itchy and unbearable. Many methods had been tried, but there was still not much effect. In addition, for women, it was their nature to love beauty. How could they let others see such an embarrassing appearance? They could only stay in the tent in the room all day, and even their mood became gloomy. Today's weather was fine and she came out for a walk with her friends. She did not expect that there would be such a strange thing in a newly opened shop here. If what this young master said was true, no matter how high the price was, she would buy this Rui Du at all costs. "May I know the price of this Rui Du?" The woman looked up at Li Yi and asked. Whether this thing was useful or not, she still had to try it out. However, since he dared to say that just now, he must have great confidence in this thing. 1 tael of silver for each bottle. Li Yi had been observing this woman. Looking at her clothing, she seemed to be a young lady from a rich family. She shouldn't be scared away by this price, right? 1 tael of silver? The woman's expression froze when she heard this, as if she did not dare to believe it. This kind of strange thing was actually only selling for 1 tael of silver? Even a piece of jewelry that she usually wore would cost dozens to hundreds of taels. 1 tael of silver to her was really nothing. Seeing the shocked expression on her face, Li Yi thought that she was scared by the price. After thinking for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, "Miss, you are the first customer since the opening of this shop. You can enjoy a half-price discount. You only need 5 taels of silver to take away a bottle of Rui Du." The woman returned to her senses and said with a smile, 1 tael of silver is 1 tael of silver. If this thing is useless, I will come find you again tomorrow. The woman in front of him was obviously a fair, rich, and beautiful woman with strong principles. No matter what, she was not willing to pay half price. She took out 1 tael of silver from her purse and asked Li Yi again for instructions on how to use it. Then she left the shop with the Rui Du. After walking out of the shop, her close friend, who had been by her side and had not spoken, looked back into the shop. She turned her head and looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. she whispered. What do you mean come find me tomorrow? Could it be that our Qin family's young lady has taken a fancy to that young man? A trace of red appeared on the woman's pretty face. She glared at her friend. You little girl, don't talk nonsense. If this Rui-Du doesn't have the effect that he said, I will naturally ask him for an explanation. An explanation? The woman beside her heard this and laughed mockingly. I think it's more like asking for a husband. You damned girl, if you dare to talk nonsense again, see if I don't tear your mouth apart. I don't dare, I don't dare. I will teach you a lesson when we get back. The two figures gradually disappeared from the street. Inside the shop, Li Yi put away the tail of silver and let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this first bottle of Rui-Du was finally sold. Chapter 108. Reality was always crueler than ideal. After a whole day he only sold 2 bottles of Rui-Du. If it wasn't for Li Yi decisively giving a 50% discount when he saw that the young woman who entered the shop later was tempted but was obviously hesitant about the price, he would only be able to make 1 sale today. This time the god of luck didn't seem to be on his side. In both of his lives he didn't do much business. He had read a lot of books on marketing, but when it came to real use he still couldn't figure it out. In the afternoon he thought of a problem. There were only 3 words Rui Workshop hanging there. People didn't know what this shop was doing. So he found a wooden board and erected it at the door. He clearly marked the effects and price of Rui-Du. After that more people came into the shop. But when they heard that it would cost 1 tael of silver to buy such a small bottle of mosquito-repellent medicine, they immediately lost interest. For most of the ordinary people in the city, if they were bitten by mosquitoes, they would just spit and wipe it. 1 tael of silver could buy a lot of food. Wasn't it crazy to spend it on this? But there were a few people who asked Li Yi if he would sell the board at the door. It seemed that he admired the calligraphy on it and even offered a price of 10 taels of silver. Of course Li Yi didn't agree. Could it be that he could only rely on his talent to make a living? After a while when he went out to take a look, the board was actually gone. After a while he could only curse at the damn thief. Tomorrow he would have to find a new board and nail it on the door. Inside the shop the young servant girl held her chin with one hand and looked at the people coming and going outside. After a long time a strange sound came from her stomach. Her pretty face slightly blushed. She turned her head to look at Li Yi and said softly, "Young master, I'm hungry." He hadn't eaten since morning. Even Li Yi felt a little hungry. He rubbed the young servant girl's head and said, "Okay, let's go out to eat first." Although the room at the back of the shop had been tidied up and there was a small kitchen, Li Yi was not in the mood to cook for himself. He closed the shop door and ate his stomach with Xiao Huan at the noodle stall outside. Originally he wanted to take the little maidservant to a high-class restaurant to eat something good, but the little maidservant was still thinking about the noodle stall on the street. In the end the two of them only spent a few copper coins. After the meal he didn't go back to the shop. There were some things that Li Yi had to think about at home. Every profession had its own unique way of doing things. Previously he had taken it for granted. In the willow leaf stockade, while Li Yi was lying on his bed, digesting more books on business theory and sales knowledge, in a courtyard with high walls in Qing and Prefecture, a charming young woman walked to the door of a room after taking a bath with a bowl of ginseng soup she had personally cooked. "Second, madam." The 2 servants at the door greeted respectfully. "Is master asleep?" the woman asked softly. "No, master hasn't come back yet. He just sent someone to send in a new batch of official documents. They are still in the study," one of the servants replied in a low voice. The woman nodded, took the ginseng soup and walked in a certain direction. In the study the middle-aged man finished reading a file. He closed his eyes and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. There was a trace of exhaustion between his eyebrows. After a moment he opened his eyes again and took another document. Before he opened it, the door of the study was pushed open. Hearing the sound, the middle-aged man frowned. What he hated the most when he was working was to be disturbed. If the servants didn't get his orders, they wouldn't dare to come in at this time. After reading the documents for a whole night he felt dizzy and annoyed. He was about to scold them, but when he looked up and saw the person coming, his expression eased. "Madam, why aren't you resting?" He put down the document in his hand, walked over, took the tray from her hand, put it on the table and said softly, His first wife died when he was young, so this was the only concubine left in the family. Normally he was busy with official business, so this second madam always took care of everything in an orderly manner. She never caused him any trouble, so she could be considered a good wife. Master, you are busy with official business, but you still need to take care of your health. I made some ginseng soup for Master. Master, drink it while it's hot. It won't be too late to read the documents later. The woman helped him straighten his collar and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work, madam." The middle-aged man held her hand and patted it. When he smelled the strange smell coming from her body, he couldn't help but feel shocked, but he didn't care. He drank a bowl of ginseng soup and said, "I still need some time to finish reading these documents. Madam, go rest first." The woman smiled and said, "I'm not tired. I'll stay here with Master." The middle-aged man didn't say anything else. He picked up the document on the table again and began to seriously read it. The woman slowly walked to his back, stretched out her lily-white hands and slowly massaged his shoulders. From time to time he smelled a faint fragrance. The middle-aged man felt his spirit gradually rise, and the trace of tiredness from before was swept away. He couldn't help but speed up as he flipped through the documents. When he reached out his hand again, there were no more documents to take. The night watchman's voice came from outside the study. Only then did he discover that the document that usually took him 2 hours to read had actually taken him less than an hour. When he turned his head, he found that the woman had fallen asleep on the desk at some point in time. Quietly looking at her slightly tired brows, the middle-aged man's heart suddenly surged with a faint trace of guilt. Wasn't he neglecting her a little by devoting himself to his official duties? He took a thin blanket from the bed in the study and was about to cover her when the woman slowly opened her eyes. She got up and looked at him. She asked, "Master, have you finished reading the document?" "Madam, it's been hard on you all these years." The middle-aged man held her hand and sighed. He pulled her into his arms. "Master." She had never seen such a gentle side to him. The woman felt a lump in her throat and tears almost fell. The husband and wife exchanged words of love for a while. The woman lay in the middle-aged man's arms and felt some changes in his body. Her pretty face suddenly became red. She said in a small voice, "Master, this is the study." A moment later, the middle-aged man held the woman in his arms behind the curtains of the study. He took a whiff of her scent and asked doubtfully, "What other perfume did Madame use tonight?" After smelling it, your husband felt exceptionally spirited. Even the speed at which I dealt with the documents has increased. Fragrance? The woman was lying in his arms with a satisfied expression. She was stunned when she heard this. She said, "I didn't use any fragrance." Before she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered that when she was bathing at night, she had dropped a few drops of the Rui dew that she had bought on the street into the bathtub. Could it be because of this? Yes, that handsome shopkeeper seemed to have said that this Rui dew had the effect of refreshing the mind. Could it be that the master's unprecedented interest tonight was also because of this Rui dew? Chapter 109. For this woman, other than being able to refresh her mind, it was no longer important whether or not this Rui dew had the effect that she thought it had. Tonight, her master was in a great mood. It was rare for him to say so many intimate words to her. In an instant she thought back to 10 years ago when he had just become a jinshi. However, because he was born into a poor family, he did not have any background. He could only become a small county magistrate in a remote place. Although his days were hard, his family was happy and harmonious. After experiencing 10 years of hard work in his official career, he was no longer a small 7th-ranked official. However, he was even busier in his work. Before today, her master had not touched her for several months. Tonight's happiness was completely beyond her expectations. The scholar did not seem to have explained the full effect of this Rui dew. The hidden effect was what she was most satisfied with. She only thought that tomorrow she would definitely buy more Rui dew. Other than the effect, it would be of great help to her master's work. Temporarily putting aside this thought, a trace of red crept up her cheeks and she took the initiative to greet him. The room was filled with love, causing the servant girl standing at the door of the study to blush. The next morning when the woman walked out of the study, her face was abnormally rosy and she looked much younger. The servant girl in the courtyard secretly looked at the woman. Thinking about the voice she heard at the door last night, a trace of red appeared on her pretty face again. Xianxia, come over. The woman waved her hand and the two pretty servant girls in the courtyard immediately trotted over. What instructions does madam have? The beautiful woman opened her mouth and said, the two of you, go to the accounts room and take 20 taels of silver. Then go to the Rui workshop, we went to yesterday, and buy a batch of Rui dew. Yes madam, we will go now. The young servant girl responded and did not delay in the direction of the accounts room. At the same time, in a deep courtyard on the other side of the prefecture city, a young servant girl knocked on the door of her young miss room. When she walked in, she saw her young miss sitting on the bed in a daze. Somewhat puzzled, she asked, young miss, what's wrong? The woman returned to her senses and said, Xiu, go to the street and find a shop called Rui Workshop and buy some Rui dew. Young miss, what is Rui dew? This was the first time the young servant girl had heard of this name, and a puzzled expression appeared on her face. When you find that shop you will naturally know. The woman got up from the bed and pointed at the toiletries in the hands of the young maidservant. She ordered, put those things down. The shop is in the East Market. It's next to the cloth shop that we went to a few days ago. Yes, young miss, I will go immediately. Watching the young servant girl leave the room, the woman's eyes moved to a small porcelain bottle on the cabinet in front of the bed. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Last night she listened to the handsome young master's words, and when she took a bath, she dripped some of the Rui dew in. She did not know if she dripped too much, but she could not fall asleep when she lay on the bed. He simply got up and read a book. Later she did not know when she fell asleep and forgot to open the curtain. If it was in the past, she would definitely be bitten by the autumn mosquitoes and suffer some pain. She did not expect that when she woke up this morning her body would be fine. There were no signs of mosquito bites. At this moment she naturally knew in her heart that the handsome young master from yesterday did not lie to her. The first thing she did when she woke up in the morning was to ask her personal servant girl to go to the auspicious luck lane and buy more auspicious dew. Even if she could not use it herself, it was not a bad idea to give it to her sisters. After the young servant girl left the mansion, she walked to the East Market in less than a quarter of an hour. She found the cloth shop that she had visited with the young miss a few days ago. When she looked at the side of the cloth shop, she finally saw the signboard that said, Rui Workshop. A trace of joy appeared on her pretty face. Just as she was about to walk over, she suddenly stopped. The door of the shop was closed. Two young girls of the same age as her were standing at the door of the shop. They had a worried look on their faces and were whispering to each other. Why is it not open today? How are we going to explain this to the madam? There is nothing we can do. It is not our fault that the shop is closed. The madam will not blame us. Let's wait for another hour. If the shop is still not open, we will go back. As the young servant girl listened to their conversation, she could not help but feel curious. Could it be that she was not the only one who came to buy that Rui dew early in the morning? She wanted to see what this Rui dew was. The young servant girl thought to herself. She looked at the sky and the gradually bustling market. She could not help but mutter a few words. The shopkeeper of this shop is really lazy. The sun is already shining on his buttocks, but he still doesn't open for business. He will definitely not make any money. Ladies, are you here to buy cloth? The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door asked eagerly when he saw the three young girls standing outside the door. We are not here to buy cloth. Uncle, do you know when this Rui workshop will open? One of the young girls looked at him and asked. Seeing that the three of them were not here to buy cloth, the fat shopkeeper lost his patience and said lazily, I don't know. Perhaps business is not good and they are closed. With that said, he strolled back into his shop. If it were not for the fact that the young girl at the door was extremely delicate, he would not even be interested in talking to her. Ah, closed. The three girls looked at each other with bitter expressions on their faces. Inside the cloth shop, the shopkeeper sat lazily on a wooden armchair. His fat face was also full of doubts. Strange, I don't know what the shop next door is selling. There was not much business yesterday, why is today? In the Willow Leaf village, Fong also had a bitter expression. His heart ached, but he still looked at Li Yi and comforted him. Young master, don't be sad. Didn't you say that failure is success? The business of Rui dew is not good, but we can still sell that liquor. Old Fong knew very well that for the sake of the Ruidu business, the son-in-law had built the workshop and rented the shop. He had invested almost all of his wealth into it. If he lost everything, he would definitely feel bad. In fact, Li Yi was not distressed about the money. In the time travel novels that he had read before, there was no lack of floral dew. But why was it that once the floral dew was sold, it immediately became popular all over the world and made a lot of money, but when it came to him no one cared about it? Everyone was time traveling. Why couldn't he do it? Was he really not as good as others? This kind of blind self-esteem was the reason why he was in a dilemma at the moment. Chapter 110. No matter what, he had spent a lot of effort on the Rui nectar. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Li Yi would not give up easily. Last night he had already thought of a few marketing strategies. If it didn't work, he could find a few shills and create hype. Of course, whether these methods would work or not, he would only know after trying it out. After breakfast, he went down the mountain and returned to the prefecture city. This time he didn't let Xiao Huan follow. However, Fong was worried and had to follow to take a look. He didn't know what the situation was like in the shop, so he didn't feel at ease staying in the stockade. At the entrance of the Rui workshop, there were only 2 young maidservants left. After waiting for more than an hour, the young maidservant lost her patience. Looks like the shop won't be open in the morning. The 2 maidservants looked at the sky and saw that it was almost noon. They shook their heads and said, although they couldn't buy the Rui nectar and couldn't report back, it wasn't their fault that the shop wasn't open. They would come back tomorrow. The 2 of them came to an agreement and were about to leave when they saw a familiar figure walking towards them from the other side of the street. Isn't that the shopkeeper we saw yesterday? One of the maidservants said in surprise. Yes, that's the young master. The other young maidservant immediately said. Yesterday, when they accompanied their madam to buy rouge and face powder on the streets, they accidentally discovered a newly opened shop. Out of curiosity, they walked in. The 2 maidservants didn't have a deep impression of this shop, but the handsome shopkeeper in the shop made them remember him. Since this young master had arrived, the prosperity lane should be open for business soon. The 2 servant girls felt a trace of joy in their hearts. They were glad that they did not leave too early. Li Yi didn't notice the 2 young maidservants at the entrance of the shop. He was thinking about something else. When he opened the door and saw the 2 young maidservants walking in behind him, he finally realized something. These 2 young maidservants were here to buy the Rui nectar. One of the young maidservants looked up at him and said in a clear voice. Fong, who was following behind, walked into the shop and saw the scene in front of him. His expression was a little stunned. Didn't the young master say that the business of the Rui nectar wasn't good and no one bought it? What was going on? These 2 maidservants seemed to have been waiting at the entrance for a long time. They were actually here to buy the Rui nectar? Li Yi just realized that the 2 maidservants in front of him looked a little familiar. After some thought, he remembered that the woman who bought the Rui nectar yesterday had 2 maidservants with her. Weren't they the 2 in front of him? It was gratifying to have a repeat customer on the second day of the shop's opening. At the very least, it meant that the problem did not lie with the Rui dew. It was just his sales method that was wrong. Li Yi took a porcelain bottle from the shelf and handed it over. The young maidservant shook her head when she saw this. She took out 2 ingots of silver and placed them on the counter. She said, there are 20 taels of silver here. Use it all to buy the Rui nectar. Fong stood at the side and stared blankly at the 2 rich and overbearing maidservants. He couldn't wrap his head around the situation. It hadn't been long since the shop opened and there were already 20 taels of silver in the account. If this was considered bad business, then what was considered good business? Even Li Yi didn't expect that the 2 young maidservants would ask for so much. The first batch of Rui nectar looked like there were only 20 or so bottles. There had to be a few bottles left at home. After selling 2 bottles yesterday, there were only about 20 bottles left in the shop. However, he certainly wouldn't refuse to earn money. There were still 22 bottles of Rui nectar left in the shop. The 20 taels of silver were all sold to the 2 young maidservants. The 2 extra bottles were given to them as gifts. It wasn't convenient for the 2 of them to carry around more than 20 bottles of Rui nectar. Li Yi found a wooden box and put them away. He watched the 2 young maidservants leave the shop with satisfaction. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. So much Rui nectar, how long would it take to use it? Of course, Li Yi didn't know that the woman had already pinned her hopes for a long period of sexual happiness on these small porcelain bottles. Naturally, she had to store some first. Son-in-law, didn't you say that the shop's business wasn't good? Fong turned to look at him with a dull gaze. If the Rui nectar could be sold at this speed, then why would he sell candied fruits? He could just sit at home and count the money. Why would he need to go through so much trouble? Li Yi sighed and looked at Fong. He slowly said, "How many times have I told you? You have to take a long-term view. Do you understand long-term? This is only a mere 20 taels of silver. In the future we will make a lot of money. Don't always be satisfied with the current situation. This is just a small step for us." Fong's face showed respect. Son-in-law was indeed a son-in-law. If it was him, he wouldn't be able to keep his composure after earning 20 taels of silver so easily. "Excuse me, do you sell Rui nectar here?" A weak voice sounded from the door. A 15 or 16-year-old maidservant walked into the shop. The first person she saw was a burly man. She couldn't help but feel a little timid and asked in a low voice. "I'm sorry, today's Rui nectar is sold out." Li Yi felt strange. Yesterday no one was interested in Rui nectar. Why did everyone come running here today? Then what should I do? The maidservant revealed a bitter expression. Just now, when the door of the shop didn't open, she got bored waiting and strolled around the street. She didn't expect that when she came back, the Rui nectar was already sold out. "How about this? You can pay half of the deposit first. When we have new stock tomorrow, we will keep it for you. You can come back tomorrow morning to collect it." Li Yi looked at her and said. The maidservant thought about it and could only nod in agreement. She wasn't afraid that they would take the deposit and run away. After all, their shop was here. In the prefectural city, cheating people of deposits was very rare. "I want 10 bottles. I'll give you 5 taels of silver." The maidservant took out 5 taels of silver from her pouch and raised her head. "What, a few bottles?" Fong's eyes widened as he saw the maidservant put the silver on the counter indifferently. He was surprised. Were all the people in the prefectural city so rich? Li Yi didn't have time to accompany Fong in a daze. He took the deposit and wrote on a piece of paper, 10 bottles of floral water, 5 taels of deposit paid. He signed his name in the lower right corner and handed it to the maidservant. After several embarrassing scenes, Li Yi felt that the unique handwriting of his previous life was better appreciated by him alone. When writing on the paper, he used Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script, which was the only one in the world. The signature was similar to the artistic calligraphy of later generations, so he wasn't afraid that someone would take it and imitate it. The maidservant put away the paper and looked up at the handsome shopkeeper's face. She vaguely felt that it was a little familiar. With doubts in her heart, she walked out of the shop. "Young master, what should we do now?" Fong looked at Li Yi excitedly and asked. Li Yi glanced at him and said with some annoyance, "What else can we do? Of course, increase production." Just when they closed the shop and planned to go back to the stockade, the maidservant had already returned home. The moment she stepped through the door, there seemed to be a flash of light in her mind. That young master just now seems to be. In the maidservant's mind, she couldn't help but think of a certain night not long ago. In the Mianxiu garden, at the mid-autumn poetry meet, she went to invite that scholar under the instruction of her mistress and fought with other maidservants until her face turned red. Chapter 111. At this moment, in a garden in the inner courtyard of the mansion, a few young women were gathered together and whispering. "That Ruidu, is it really that magical?" The Qin girl told them what happened last night, and the woman next to her asked in disbelief. The other woman said, "Yuning is probably exaggerating. Ever since autumn, mosquitoes have been rampant and we've tried all kinds of methods. Why haven't we heard of this Ruidu?" For women, rampant mosquitoes were really annoying after autumn. A few close friends were talking and the woman called Qin Yuning mentioned a strange thing called Ruidu that they had never heard of before. This piqued their curiosity. "Is that thing really as good as the shopkeeper said?" The woman who went out with the Qin girl yesterday looked at her with surprise and asked. "Whether it's useful or not, you'll know after you try it." Qin Yuning didn't explain much. She turned around and said with confusion, What's wrong with Xiu today? She's gone for so long, why isn't she back yet? Just as she was thinking about it, the figure of her personal servant girl finally appeared in her line of sight. Seeing the servant girl walk over empty-handed, a confused expression appeared on her face and she asked, "Where's the thing I told you to buy?" The servant girl had a bitter expression and said innocently, "Miss, when I found the Rui workshop, the shopkeeper said that Rui do was sold out. But I already told them that they will keep the Rui do for us tomorrow. At that time Xiu can go get it." The Qin girl looked at her suspiciously and asked, "How could it be sold out so early? Honestly, did you just slack off and go shopping?" The servant girl couldn't help but feel a bit guilty after being seen through so quickly. She quickly changed the topic and said, "That's right, miss, I went to the Rui workshop today and found something else." "What is it?" The servant girl's trick was indeed effective. The Qin girl was curious and she asked with some confusion. The surrounding women were clearly interested in this matter as well, and they all turned to look at the young servant girl. Thinking of that incident, the servant girl was still a little surprised and said, "The shopkeeper of the Rui workshop seems to be Li." "Li? Which Li?" Hearing this, the woman surnamed Qin became even more curious in her heart. "Li? The shopkeeper of Rui Square. What's going on?" The reactions of the surrounding women seemed to be even more intense than hers, all of them revealing expressions of curiosity. "Li, could it be that our eldest daughter of the Qin family has finally fallen in love with the mundane world?" Hearing their nonsense, the girl surnamed Qin glared at them. She then looked at the young maidservant and asked, "Why are you beating around the bush? Tell me what's going on with this Li guy." Hearing this, the young servant girl said with some grievance, "It's the Li that Miss asked me to invite to the mid-autumn poetry meet. Miss, have you forgotten?" She secretly complained in her heart, "Miss is really heartless. That day she clearly liked Li very much. How long has it been, and now she doesn't even remember what he looks like? Mid-autumn poetry meet, banquet?" The expression on the pretty face of the girl surnamed Qin froze, and then she seemed to remember something. She asked with some surprise, "You mean that Li?" At the mid-autumn poetry meet she had sent Xiu to invite only one scholar. Naturally she quickly remembered. Could it be that the handsome gentleman she saw yesterday was the Li Yi from the Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and Shuidiao Getu? On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, although she was shocked by Li's talent, she really didn't see his face. She only heard the people around her say that Li was both talented and good-looking. There were few scholars in Qingyan Prefecture who could compare. She was still regretful that she hadn't seen his face. She didn't think that yesterday at the Rui Lane she didn't recognize that Li when she saw him. "What Li? Who is Li? Yes, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense." Seeing the expression on Qin Yuning's face, the surrounding girls were even more confused. Their hearts were stifled and they all asked questions. "It's that Li Yi from Shuidiao Getu, Li." The young servant girl looked at them and said with some confusion. In her heart she was curious. What was wrong with them? A few days ago they kept talking about that Li and read his poems all day long. Why did they all seem to have amnesia? It looked like the young ladies of these large families were all fickle people. As she thought this, when she looked at the other young ladies again, the young servant girl couldn't help but be startled. She was so frightened by the light in their eyes that she took several steps back. Next to the Rui Lane, the owner of the cloth shop slowly walked out of his shop and looked at the shop opposite. In the past 2 days he had done this action countless times. He didn't know when, but the door that had been closed for a day had been opened. It had to be said that the shop opposite was really strange. It had only been open for a day the day before yesterday and had been open for a little less than an hour yesterday. After that he hadn't seen the shopkeeper appear again. Could it be that because business wasn't good he gave up? The more the fat shopkeeper thought about it, the more likely it seemed. That shopkeeper looked more like a scholar than a businessman. He opened the shop but didn't advertise. Customers didn't even know what was sold inside. How could there be business? The rent for this shop probably cost 1 tael of silver a day. No business meant a loss. He wanted to see how long this shop could stay open for. When this shop really couldn't stay open any longer, he could talk to the scholar and perhaps he could rent it out at a low price. At that time the cloth shop could expand. Presumably business would be better. If business was better he could consider opening a few more shops and hire a few more workers. He could retreat behind the scenes and count his silver. If he could become the largest cloth merchant in Qing, and prefectural city in his lifetime, he would have no regrets in this life. Not far away, a dozen or so women walked in this direction in a group. The fat shopkeeper saw clearly that these women were coming in the direction of the cloth shop. A smile immediately appeared on his face. So many customers had come early in the morning. The cloth shop's business was booming. He would talk to the scholar tomorrow. If he was willing to sell this shop, the price could be discussed. This way he would be one step closer to his dream. Thinking of this, the smile on the fat shopkeeper's face became even more radiant. Chapter 112. Ladies, come in and have a look. Our shop just got a new batch yesterday. The fat shopkeeper greeted them with a smile. He watched these women walk past him and stop in front of the shop next door. The fat shopkeeper had already made an inviting gesture. The smile on his face froze. He stood there stupidly like a statue standing in the autumn morning breeze. This is Rui Workshop? The group of women stood at the entrance of the shop, and when they saw the 3 words on the signboard, a few of them immediately revealed shocked expressions. Flowing like the clouds and flowing water, lively and lively just like a swimming dragon. The style of these 3 words is already unique, but I've never heard of it before. Could it be that young Master Li created it himself? Hearing this, a woman asked doubtfully, but didn't they all say that Li's literary talent is brilliant, but his calligraphy is unsightly? It's just a rumor. It may not be credible. Another woman curled her lips and said, scholars have always despised each other. They are jealous of Li's talent, so it's not strange for them to belittle him. Several women discussed in a low voice at the door. Suddenly, one of them turned around and looked at the figure standing stiffly in the wind. She asked doubtfully, what happened to him? A new batch of new goods. The owner of the cloth shop said what he didn't finish just now in a daze. In the autumn wind, only the sound of heartbreak could be heard. Inside the shop, Li Yi had just put the new batch of Rui Du that he had rushed to make yesterday on the counter. He was planning how to promote it after today. In the past 2 days he had crammed some knowledge about business and sales. Now he was no longer as ignorant as he used to be. Rui Du was a new thing that had never been seen before in this world. It was not easy for people here to accept it. There was a sound at the door. Li Yi turned his head and saw the girl who had paid the deposit yesterday coming in from outside. She should be here to take the Rui Du. He stood up from his seat. Just as he took a step forward, he was stunned on the spot before he could speak. Looking at the sudden appearance of more than a dozen women in the shop and their eager eyes, Li Yi's heart trembled. He suddenly felt like a sheep entering a pack of wolves. What's going on? Could it be, they are going to rob me? It's over. Li Yi felt some regret. If he had known that the security in Qingyan Prefecture was so bad, he should have brought Fong here today. It didn't seem like a good idea. Fong could handle several men at once. As for women, thinking of his cowardly manner in front of his wife, it was very likely that he couldn't handle such a big scene. If only Rui was here. At the very least he wouldn't be in such a passive position. While Li Yi was observing these women, they were also observing him. This young Master Li, the shopkeeper, is indeed a man of striking appearance. A certain lady's beautiful eyes shone with anticipation. It's him, it's him, it's him. A talented woman who had seen him at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet felt her heart beating wildly. So he's young Master Li. I didn't recognize him yesterday and lost the initiative. What a pity, what a pity. The woman surnamed Chen sighed, and her heart was filled with regret. Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Young master, there's no need to panic. We're here to buy Rui Du. A woman walked up and said with a smile. Her words were half-truths. Even though buying the Rui nectar was one of her goals, the most important thing was to meet this legendary talent. Of course, after the previous incident, they didn't dare to be too enthusiastic. If he flew away like last time, where would they go to find him? Young master, don't be alarmed. We are here to buy Rui nectar. These words made Li Yi uncomfortable. Who was alarmed? Which eye of theirs saw him alarmed? He was clearly very calm all the time, okay? He put down the teapot with one hand and moved the other hand away from the abacus. His expression calmed down and a smile returned on his face. "Miss, this way please." He led the women to the counter where the Rui nectar was placed and began to introduce it to them carefully. Early in the morning there were so many people here to buy Rui nectar. This was beyond his expectations. It seemed that as long as the item was good he didn't have to worry about not being able to sell it. Among these women there was a woman he had seen 2 days ago. She was the first customer of the shop. It seemed that she had actively advertised the shop. He would give her a cost price later to show his gratitude. Li Yi didn't know that for these women Rui nectar was only secondary. The main reason was that they were here to meet the elusive number 1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture. Or perhaps the number 1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom. As these women listened to his introduction, their gazes swept across the shop. Very quickly they were attracted by the paintings hanging on the walls. Among them they were either young ladies of wealthy families or talented women of some renown in Qing and Prefecture. They had received a good education from a young age and knew at least a little bit about poetry and painting. Although the many paintings in front of them were average in terms of meticulous brushwork and did not stand out, they looked so real. They had never seen anything like this in their lives. Thinking about the other person's identity, they more or less understood that he must have taken a different path and walked out of the traditional pattern of painting. It was rare to see someone with this kind of spirit and courage among the many scholars of Qing and Prefecture. Most people in the prefectural city probably thought that Li of Shuidiao Getu was only good at poetry. They didn't know that his skill in painting had already reached a higher level, and his calligraphy had truly entered the realm of a grandmaster. It was laughable that those people had spread rumors that Li wasn't good at calligraphy. They didn't know that just the 3 words Rui Workshop was enough to shut everyone's mouths. But there was one thing they couldn't understand. Since he had such talent, why didn't he pursue an official career and instead chose to be a small shopkeeper here? Could it be that at such a young age he had already seen through all this and was a reclusive genius? With this doubt in their hearts, their interest in him grew. At the side, Li Yi's mouth was dry from talking. He turned his head to look at these women and found that they were all looking around, clearly not paying attention. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Were these women really here to buy ruidu? Could it be that they were sent by other shops to cause trouble? Luckily these women didn't disappoint Li Yi. After a while he bought 1 bottle and I bought 2. If you bought 3 bottles I bought 4. If you bought 5 bottles I bought 10. Very quickly, the ruidu that they had rushed to make yesterday was all sold out again. Ladies, if you think this ruidu is useful you might as well introduce it to your acquaintances. If you buy more than 20 bottles at one time, you can give me another 2 bottles for free. Seeing these women taking out silver from their purses without even batting an eyelid, Li Yi immediately realized that these were the true customers of the ruidu, so he said with a smile on his face, all right. For young ladies like them, which of them didn't have a few close friends in their boudoir? Just like that the rumors spread from 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Once they opened up a sales channel in this circle, everything else would follow naturally. Their publicity was naturally much better than hiring people to advertise on the street. Of course this ruidu is very beneficial to women like us. Even if you don't say it we will tell other sisters. A woman smiled sweetly and said, it's getting late. We won't disturb Li's business anymore. We will leave first. Ladies, goodbye. Welcome to come again next time. Li Yi stood at the door of the shop and waved goodbye with a smile on his face. They took the initiative to advertise for him. These women were all good people. After a moment, a puzzled expression suddenly appeared on his face. That's not right. How did they know my surname is Li? Beside him, a shop away, the fat boss of the cloth shop looked at him with a big face full of envy. Chapter 113. Li Yi thought hard for a long time to come up with a marketing strategy, but he didn't use it after all. In the last few days the number of customers in Rui workshops suddenly increased. Every day before noon, the ruidu produced in a hurry the day before was sold out. Most of the customers were women, and their clothes and temperament were all extraordinary. They didn't look like ordinary people. From this point of view, those women were really trustworthy, and he didn't waste the 10% discount he gave them. The only thing he couldn't stand was that some women looked at him in a strange way after entering the store. Every time he thought about it he got goosebumps. Apart from that, there were also some elegant scholars who bought the ruidu. Scholars who studied all day would inevitably feel dizzy. There were only a few people who could lift their heads and prick their buttocks to keep their spirits up, and they were the ones who didn't have the money to buy the ruidu. For those rich scholars, they could spend 1 tael of silver to buy a bottle of ruidu. When they were tired from reading they could drop a few drops and instantly feel energetic. Their recitation efficiency would skyrocket. It was as if God was helping them. Of course they wouldn't feel bad about spending 1 tael of silver. Fang's smile never disappeared from his face. The number of customers increased day by day. According to the current situation, the market should be far from saturated. Li Yi did not take the opportunity to rush the production and pass off shoddy goods as quality goods. Before he ran out of money, it was more important to build up his reputation. This was only the first product launched by Rui Lane. Only by building up his reputation could he earn more money in the future. Of course, the rarer something is, the more expensive it is. If ruidu was as abundant as plain water, only a fool would spend 1 tael of silver to buy it. With the increase of customers, Li Yi and Xiao Huan were obviously too busy to take care of all the customers at the same time. For the past 2 days he had been thinking in his heart whether he should recruit more people or not. The business of Rui's workshop was already on the right track. If he had to do all the small things himself, it would go against his original intention. Making money was only for the sake of accumulating original capital and using the fastest time to embark on the path of retirement. In order to make money he had to wake up earlier than the chickens and sleep later than the dogs. He had never been so tired in his previous life. It was not worth it. Rui Workshop's business was booming. Every day before noon it would be sold out and closed for the day. Naturally, it attracted the attention of many people. Of course, the people who felt it the most were the surrounding shops. One was as crowded as a marketplace while the other was completely deserted. After asking around, they found out that the newly opened shop was selling a small bottle of Rui nectar for 1 tael of silver. What was even more surprising was that there were actually so many people who went to buy it. As for the effects of the ruidu, they had also seen it from the signboard at the entrance. Wasn't slapping myself twice more effective than the ruidu? It repels mosquitoes and relieves the itch. What's wrong with being bitten twice by mosquitoes? You're actually spending a tael of silver to buy this thing. Prevents diseases. Nonsense. What kind of panacea do you think you're selling? However, after hearing about it, they only curled their lips and felt that no one would buy it. Just like that, it successfully squeezed into the circle of Qing and Prefecture's socialites. It became the new favorite of the young ladies of Qing and Prefecture. Even the scholars of Qing and Prefecture held it in high esteem. This caused the business of Rui Workshop to flourish day by day. Of course, this was not without its disadvantages. After all, the customers who came out of the shop would sometimes walk around the surrounding shops and buy things when they were in a good mood. This caused their business to increase. Their profits increased by more than 10%. Regarding this, the shopkeepers felt extremely complicated. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. At noon, the sun had not yet risen above their heads. In Rui Workshop, Li Yi had already sold the last bottle of ruidu. At the entrance of the shop he hung a "Sold out today" sign. He sat on a chair tiredly. Xiao Huan walked over from the side and placed her small hand on his shoulder, gently massaging it. His eyes stared ahead in a daze as if he had a lot on his mind. When the first girl secretly gave him the handkerchief embroidered with mandarin ducks and immortals of the Magpie Bridge, Li Yi realized that something was wrong. Later he saw a few girls secretly fighting over an order that he had personally written. The board on the door was stolen by someone in the middle of the night. It was replaced with a new one, and within 2 days it was stolen again. At this time he finally understood that he had most likely been exposed. The spread of immortals of the Magpie Bridge was purely accidental. As for Shuidiao Getu, it was purely forced by that Shenjiao. He had not the slightest bit of precaution and had inexplicably become so popular. Li Yi expressed his innocence. He only wanted to do a small business. He didn't want to become some #1 scholar. Compared to this title, it was more practical to give him a few hundred taels of silver. He was half happy and half worried. Although his peaceful life had been disturbed, it wasn't completely without benefits. The booming business of Rui Workshop was most likely due to the fame brought about by the two poems. After all, in this world, the effect of a scholar was equivalent to the effect of a celebrity in the future. If Yang Yanzhou held a small porcelain bottle and said a few lines, "Rui nectar, women say it's good after using it," and put up such an advertisement, perhaps even the doors ill of this place would be trampled to pieces by the women who admired him. Of course, with Li Yi's current fame, if he personally stood up to promote Rui Workshop, the effect would probably be even better. Then he would throw out a few famous poems, famous paintings from past dynasties, and a copy of Wang Shiji's preface to the Orchid Pavilion. He would hang them on the wall. Anyone who wanted to enter the shop would have to pay 1 tael of silver. Never underestimate the temptation of these things to scholars. Although this was extremely vulgar, Li Yi did not doubt that there would still be countless people flocking to the shop. Up until now, earning money was still his main goal in life. However, Li Yi could not accept this kind of immoral way of earning money with a clear conscience for the time being. The most difficult and stressful period had passed. The shop's business should be stable for a while. Li Yi also finally let out a sigh of relief. It was time to give himself a break and relax. The little servant girl stood behind Li Yi. The strength of her hand was gentle. She could see that the son-in-law was thinking about something. She slowed down her breathing and tried not to make a sound. However, the smile on the corner of her mouth could not be concealed. The matters of Rui Workshop had always been handled by her and Li Yi. When she thought of something, her eyes turned into crescent moons. These days, son-in-law has earned a lot of money. Chapter 114. In less than half a day, the new batch of Rui nectar was sold out again. Even the prepaid order was 7 days later. Li Yi closed the shop as usual and went back to the stockade village with the little maid. Not long after, a carriage left the shop. After driving out of the mansion, it went straight along the official road. After a little more than 15 minutes, it arrived at the foot of Green Willow Mountain. If they didn't continue along the official road, it would be a rugged mountain road. The carriage would be difficult to travel. The young coachman jumped off the carriage, turned around and said loudly, "Sir, we've arrived." The curtain of the carriage opened. Li Yi took Xiaohuan's hand and got off the carriage. He took out 10 copper coins from his waist and handed it to the coachman. He said, "Tomorrow is the same time. Remember to wait here." The coachman put away the copper coins and said with a silly smile, "Sir, don't worry. I will wait here for you tomorrow morning. I won't delay your business." For this coachman, the young master in front of him was already a regular customer. The business of the carriage shop was not very good. He was naturally satisfied with a stable customer who would rent a carriage twice a day. Li Yi waved his hand and watched the coachman drive away. He walked towards the stockade village with the little maid. Between Willow Leaf Village and Qing'an Prefecture, except for this section of mountain road, there were mostly flat roads that could be used by carriages. Renting a carriage could save more than half of the time compared to walking. Although the carriage was a little bumpy on the official road after leaving the prefectural city, it was not too violent. Since Li Yi knew that there was such a business as driving a carriage in the prefectural city, he often used this means of transportation. For ordinary people, in order to save 10 copper coins, they would rather choose to walk. But now the business of Rui Workshop was so good that he could earn dozens of silver coins every day. He didn't need to save money in these places. What's more, the time saved was enough for him to create more than 10 copper coins. After walking on the mountain road for less than an hour, they could see the stockade village. Not long after entering the stockade village, they saw Fong surrounded by a few girls. He looked embarrassed and didn't know what happened. Today Fong was the most successful man in the Willow Leaf Village except for Li Yi. He was envied by countless people. Li Yi was a lazy person. After the business of the candied haws and the workshop went on the right track, he completely let go and let Fong take charge. Now, even the direct descendants of the Lu family had to act according to Fong's wishes. In the eyes of others, he was naturally awe-inspiring. More than once, Li Yi had seen several women gathered together and talked about how much virtue Fong's wife had accumulated in her previous life to be able to marry such a capable man. Their words were full of admiration for Fong, just like an older fangirl. Of course, Li Yi had never mentioned this to Fong. He did not want him to get carried away and harm a married woman. He did not want to cause a tragedy and destroy the harmony and stability of the stronghold. However, this was only limited to those women. When would these girls also? This made Li Yi a little hard to imagine. Did he really underestimate Fong's charm before? Uncle Fong, please help us. The girls looked at Fong and begged. Fong was never good at dealing with women. Being surrounded by so many girls, he could not help but feel a headache. He said with an embarrassed face, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but there is no shortage of people in the candied Haas factory. You can't help much even if you go there. The work in the workshop is not something that you girls can do. We have nothing to do at home all day. Uncle Fong, please help us. There are many things we can do. Yes, Uncle Fong, I beg you." Only Uncle Fong could help them with this matter. The girls did not give up and continued to beg. When the voices entered his ears, Fong felt a headache again. He glanced around and suddenly saw a familiar figure walking towards him. As if he had been granted amnesty, he immediately strode over. "Son-in-law, you're back." "Brother-in-law." Seeing Li Yi, the girls also bowed in a reserved manner. "What's going on?" Li Yi looked at Fong and asked with some doubt. "These children don't want to stay in the village. They insisted that I find some work for them." Fong looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, "There is no shortage of people in the candied Haas factory. As for the workshop, as you know, son-in-law." Li Yi nodded. After the direct descendants of the Liu family joined, the candied Haas business had reached a saturation point. As for the workshop, no one was allowed to go near it on normal days. The biggest reason was confidentiality. Another reason was because of safety issues. The workshop involved alcohol and fire, so it was not suitable for these women. In my opinion, women should stay in the village, cook and take care of the house. It's really not suitable for them to go out and show their faces. Fong looked up at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, don't you think so?" When the girls beside Fong heard this, a look of disappointment appeared on their pretty faces. They could not help but lower their heads. Uncle Fong was right. As women, especially unmarried women, they should be respectful and not show their faces in public. However, their parents were busy at home. Even Sister Qing was teaching the children in the school. It seemed that everyone had something to do, but they were the only ones idling around at home. Naturally, they did not feel good about it. Li Yi glanced at Fong. For these girls to make such a request, they were much more ambitious than Fong. He turned to look at them and said with a smile, "It just so happens that Rui Workshop has been very busy recently. If you are willing, you can go there and help out." "Son-in-law, this." Fong looked up at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. "Really?" The girls looked up with the same look of disbelief. Li Yi nodded and said, "The shops in the prefectural city have been very busy recently. You can go to the shops tomorrow after you pack up today." He did not expect these girls to have such intentions. However, he had already planned to hire people. These girls were his people and could be trusted. Instead of hiring a few outsiders, it was better to let them go. "Thank you, brother-in-law." The girls were overjoyed. Their pretty faces immediately bloomed with smiles as they quickly thanked him. "Of course, this matter must first be approved by your families." Seeing their excited expressions, Li Yi added. One of the girls smiled and said, "Don't worry, brother-in-law. They have already agreed." Since their families had agreed, Li Yi naturally did not have any objections. He went to the workshop to take a look and instructed Fong and the rest to hurry up with the production of the new batch of Rui Du. Previously, he did not expect that the Rui Du would be in such short supply. When the funds were sufficient and they could start producing spirits, such a small workshop would not be able to meet the production requirements. By that time, even the manpower would be insufficient. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.